Chapter 241, Stalemate Boom. With a thunderous crash, Gamabunta splashed down beside Nathan at the edge of the battlefield. The great toad planted his massive feet in the sand and glared toward their opponent, the fearsome Four-Tails, whose melting release had already proven deadly. "All right, kid," Gamabunta rumbled. "What's your plan?" Nathan surveyed the creature's molten limbs. Charging in head-on would be suicide. Its range and melting jutsu would lock him out at every turn. He turned back to the toad and spoke quietly. "I can't get close if it's focused on me. I need you to draw its attention, make it think you're the real target. Then I'll slip in and strike." Gamabunta's eyes narrowed. "Me? You want me to be the bait?" "Exactly," Nathan said. "Once it's zeroed in on you, I'll have my opening." "Absolutely not." The towering toad shook his head so hard the earth trembled. "Are you out of your mind?" He stopped, then barked out a single growling word. 100 pounds! Nathan cocked an eyebrow. "What?" Gamabunta blinked, momentarily at a loss. Even he couldn't quite explain why he'd blurted out a weight measurement. He only knew it had slipped out in his panic. But as he stared at Nathan's calm, confident gaze, he realized that sometimes the riskiest plays paid off the biggest dividends. He squared his shoulders, ready to follow the boy's daring plan, even if he still didn't fully understand it. Nathan stood before the towering toad boss and laid out his terms with cool precision. "I need 100 kilograms of top-grade leaf country tobacco." Gamabunta's eyes went wide, and he swallowed hard. This mission seems a bit—" Nathan raised a second finger. 200. "No," Nathan added, lifting a third finger. 300 kilograms, and that's my final offer." "Fine." Gamabunta conceded, suddenly adopting an air of solemn respect. 300 it is. A pact is a pact. We honor our agreements. You have my word, Nathan. I'll handle everything from here." With that, the great toad drew his short sword, leaped skyward on powerful legs, and bounded off in pursuit of the two-tailed beast in the distance. Nathan merely chuckled at the display, tapped into his instantaneous technique, and slipped after him in silence. Proof that their little price haggling had been more jest than business. Nathan stood at the very edge of the battlefield when Gamabunta's booming voice cut through the chaos. "Hey, take a crack at my toad cut with the short sword." Before he could register more, the enormous blade came hurtling down from the sky, aimed straight at Lao Zi. Of course, short sword was an understatement. Relative to Gamabunta's massive frame, it was a 3-meter-long glaive that could fell trees. To Nathan's eyes, it was nothing less than a giant scythe. Lao Zi's eyes, now wild and animalistic, locked onto the falling blade. He didn't duck or dodge. Instead, he thrust both arms forward and caught the edge barehanded. The impact reverberated like a thunderclap. The earth beneath his feet shattered, sending him crashing waist first into a sudden crater. Even under the protection of his tailed beast cloak, he howled in pain. Then, with a crack of raw power, Lao Zi whipped his twin tails around in a blinding arc. The wind howled as the twin strikes bore down on Gamabunta. Surprised by the ferocity in those two lashes, the Toad Lord chose not to resist. Nathan watched, breathless, as the collision of titans reshaped the ground between them. Nathan yanked his short sword free and leapt backward. Thud, thud, the two tails of his cloak slammed into the ground, cracking the earth and sending tremors rippling outward. Spotting Gamabunta slipping away, Nathan's opponent seized the moment, arms shooting up to strike the toad in midair. Nathan recognized the stance immediately. His foe was about to repeat the very trick Nathan had used against Gamabunta. Sure enough, dark red chakra poured over his opponent's hands, solidifying into two massive tailed beast claws that lunged for Gamabunta's flanks. Suspended with nowhere to brace himself, the giant toad seemed doomed, but Gamabunta's battle instincts were razor-sharp. In a flash, he wove a series of seals and roared out his ninjutsu. Water release, Teppanyama. Two torrents of swirling water blasted forth, smashing into the claws just before their tips and snapping them apart. Shaken, the chakra talons released their grip. Gamabunta spiraled once through the air, then landed squarely on all fours, safe and ready for the next move. Nathan bolted forward, slipping out of range of the two savage, tailed beast claws. Frustrated at losing his mark, he prepared to give chase, when a sudden, bone-deep warning rippled through him. Instinctively, he whipped his tail around to shield his back. A wind spiral of chakra-enveloped kunai tore through his tail and buried itself in his cloak-like beast armor. Nathan's heart froze as a cold shiver raced across his spine. Had he not reacted at the last instant, Namikaze Minato's blade would have pierced straight through his protective hide, leaving deadly wounds. It was Minato who had struck. Seizing the perfect moment, the yellow flash had hurled his razor-sharp wind-release chakra kunai with lethal intent, hoping to fell Nathan in a single, decisive blow. Only the heightened survival instinct of the Four Tails, the primal awareness of his beast form, had deflected the attack and saved him from near-certain death. Minato Namikaze felt a twinge of regret, then activated the Flying Thunder God technique. In an instant, he vanished from sight with a sharp crackle. Old Purple's tail thundered against the ground as he roared in frustration. With Minato gone, the Four Tails turned his fury on Gamabunta, hurling molten spheres of magma at the great toad as if he were nothing more than a relief valve. At the same time, he shifted into melting chakra mode, forging a second layer of molten armor around himself. This time, the magma plating didn't just cover his torso, it extended all the way down his tail, creating two roaring rivers of lava that trailed behind him like living flames. Compared to the Five Tails' boiling style, Old Purple's melting style was far more formidable. Minato, with his unparalleled speed and precision, could dance circles around Han's bubbling onslaught and force him into retreat. But against the Four Tails' magma armor, there was no slipping in close, no exploiting a single crack in his defense. Up close, Old Purple was simply untouchable. A few days ago on the front lines, Old Purple had held back his trump card. There were simply too many enemy shinobi in play, and Minato Namikaze had no trouble keeping him contained. Now that Old Purple was free to unleash his full strength, the challenge before Minato had effectively doubled. "Good thing I've still got Bunta on my side," he murmured, eyes flicking toward the massive toad as it began to whirl its arms, drawing up torrents of water. Without him, this would be a real problem. Minato allowed himself a small, confident smile. With Gamabunta about to launch a colossal water-style jutsu, today's battle was already all but won. Chapter 242, Each One's Own Battle. A crackling roar split the air as water release, water escape and lava release, lava escape collided in a blinding burst of white steam. At the very edge of the battlefield, Nathan strained every fiber of his being and activated his Sharingan. Through the swirling mist, his crimson eyes danced over the titanic clash unfolding before him, Gamabunta versus Lao Zi. Nathan's mind raced as he took stock of the fight. On paper, water release seemed inferior to its molten counterpart. And when it came to raw chakra reserves, Gamabunta trailed behind Lao Zi's newfound four-tailed power. Yet the giant toad of Mount Myoboku was no ordinary frog. He brimmed with senjutsu chakra, an extraordinary energy that amplifies the strength of any ninjutsu it enfolds. Under the blessing of senjutsu, Gamabunta's water release rivaled the sheer destructive force of Lao Zi's lava assault. As for chakra volume, that disparity was far less critical than one might expect. Lao Zi had only managed to harness half of the four-tailed beast's power so far. He couldn't tap into its full chakra potential. That limitation meant he would never gain an overwhelming, unassailable advantage. Nathan's Sharingan flickered, locking onto every rise and fall of the two combatants. He knew that in this battle, technique and timing counted just as much as raw strength. And on this shifting field of steam and fire, every second could decide who emerged victorious. Secondly, Gamabunta's agility let him evade Lao Zi's strikes with quick, low-cost leaps, conserving his chakra. More importantly, Minato Namikaze stood ready at his side, making it impossible for Lao Zi to simply delay until Gamabunta ran out of energy. In essence, as long as Gamabunta could survive a frontal assault, Lao Zi was doomed. Unless he fully transformed into a tailed beast, and even then, he still wouldn't stand a chance against both Gamabunta and Minato working in tandem. After all, Gamabunta already had the pedigree to take on any tailed beast, and Minato had yet to unveil his full arsenal. His secret trump card, Sage Mode, remained unused, a power-up that would allow him to face the Four Tails head-on without breaking a sweat. On top of that, Minato's sophisticated sealing techniques were tailor-made for subduing tailed beasts. There simply wasn't a realistic path to victory for Lao Zi. Sure enough, events played out exactly as Nathan had predicted. Under the combined onslaught of Gamabunta and Minato Namikaze, Lao Zi began to falter before long. Nathan could feel his strength waning. At the fight's outset, he had maintained a near-constant assault, forcing his opponents to scramble for defense. Now, however, nearly half his movements were spent parrying blows or evading strikes. If this trend continued, defeat was inevitable, and without reinforcements from the Hidden Stone Village, he would become the first Jinchuriki captured by Konoha. As this thought raced through his mind, a familiar surge of chakra flickered at the edge of his consciousness, a telepathic link from Yamanaka Kiku. Her calm voice piped into his head. "Captain, the Stone Village shinobi on the perimeter are shifting their formation. They're preparing to encircle you." Nathan's eyes swept the battlefield. In every direction, clusters of rock ninjas were massing at the fringes, organizing into distinct assault units. The encirclement had already begun. No time to waste. He tapped back into the link. "Kiku, I need your squad to neutralize those perimeter units, immediately." A pause, then Kiku's voice, edged with uncertainty. "Understood. I'll—" "Do it," Nathan interrupted firmly. "If they seal this perimeter, I'm finished." In that instant, the tide of the battle hinged on Yamanaka Kiku's response, and on Nathan's dwindling reserves of chakra as he braced for the enemy's next move. Nathan frowned and looked around the camp. "Any questions?" Yamanogi hesitated, then spoke up. "Captain, earlier the Four Tails Jinchuriki struck our second line of defense. We suffered heavy casualties, so—" Nathan cut him off. "Didn't I explicitly order you to avoid a head-on clash? Why weren't you listening?" Yamanogi ran a hand through his hair in frustration. "It wasn't our plan to fight him directly, sir. He's incredibly fast, and the Rock Nine were blocking our retreat. We had nowhere to go." Nathan fell silent for a moment, then let the matter drop. "All right. How many of you are still combat ready?" "About 60%, Yamanogi replied, "but only 30% are fit to keep fighting. The rest are seriously wounded." Nathan's jaw tightened. Losing over half their strength in such a short span, no wonder Yamanogi hesitated. He swept his gaze across the battlefield, estimating the number of rock nin arrayed against them. Then he gave his orders. "Leave the wounded here under guard. The rest of you, fall in behind me and prepare to move out. I'll help you." "Yes, Captain." At Nathan's declaration, Yamanaka Kiku straightened immediately. The reputation of the Ghost Sword preceded him among the Rock Village shinobi, and even more so within Konoha's ranks. Knowing Nathan himself would step in put Kiku's mind at ease. With the mental link severed, Nathan allowed himself one last look at the fierce clash unfolding before him. Lao Zi, Minato Namikaze, and the towering Gamabunta locked in combat on the battlefield. Then he turned on his heel and strode away. Minato, ever observant, caught the movement out of the corner of his eye. He followed Nathan's departure with a single knowing glance, then shifted his focus back to the swelling ranks of Rock Village ninjas massing around him. Nathan's intention was already clear, and Minato chose not to interfere. Meanwhile, deeper in the forest, Nagashima Tomohisa glanced over at the Iwagakure Special Jonin beside him. "Are all the other units in position?" The Jonin gave a crisp nod. "Several captains just sent word. They'll be ready within 5 minutes." 5 minutes, Nagashima muttered, eyes narrowing as he studied the distant battlefield. "Very well, we strike in 5 minutes." "Understood," the Jonin replied. He started to turn away, then froze. His expression sharpened, and he lifted a hand to his temple, as though listening to some inner signal. Nagashima watched him go still, then finally asked, "What is it?" "The Konoha shinobi are making unexpected moves," the Jonin reported, voice low. "They appear to be attempting an encirclement. Our flanks are shifting as they redeploy." Nagashima frowned. "Do they have outside reinforcements?" "None detected so far." A tense silence fell between them before Nagashima pressed on. "Then why are they tightening the noose around us?" "I don't know," the Iwagakure Special Jonin admitted. For a heartbeat, both he and Nagashima Tomohisa stood frozen in mutual bewilderment. It wasn't exactly Konoha's fault. More to the point, it was their own intelligence that was flawed. After the last clash, they'd known precisely how depleted the Hidden Leaf forces were, nowhere near a match for their strength. Yet, in the face of that reality, Konoha's shinobi had somehow split up and moved to encircle them, leaving themselves with zero backup. It was literally asking for suicide. Wait, Nagashima said suddenly, eyes sharpening as an idea struck him. He jabbed a finger toward his companion. Quick, check! Is Uchiha Nathan still on the field? The Iwagakure Jonin paled. His hand blurred through a rapid sequence of seals as he activated his sensory ninjutsu. He closed his eyes, reaching out with chakra, scouring the battlefield for Nathan's presence. Several agonizing breaths passed. Then, slowly, he opened his eyes and let his hand drop. He's gone, he said in a hollow voice. I can't sense a trace of his chakra anywhere. Chapter 243, Out of Control Boom. An explosion ripped through the forest just a short distance away. Nagashima Tomohisa and the Iwagakure Special Jonin exchanged a sharp glance, then simultaneously activated the body flicker technique, vanishing from sight and reappearing at the blast site in an instant. They arrived to find only 2 bodies of Iwagakure Jinin. One had been blown apart by the detonating tag at point-blank range, destroyed beyond recognition. The other lay still, its vitals cleanly severed by a single, precise strike, the lethal weapon a short sword. Everything pointed to one conclusion. The assassin's target was Nathan. It was almost laughable. While their forces had been scouring the area for this mysterious intruder, he'd slipped through their defenses and slain several ninja right under their noses. And worse still, this violent ambush was only the beginning. Before they could exchange more than a worried look, a piercing scream shattered the tense silence. Without a second thought, Nagashima and the Jonin raced toward the sound, prepared to face whatever horrors lay ahead. A dark shape flickered at the edge of their vision and was gone, slipping into the depths of the forest. Nagashima Tomohisa and his companion didn't give chase. Instead, they knelt beside the 2 shaken survivors still lying amid the smashed brush. Nagashima studied them for a moment, then asked in a low, clipped tone, "Who attacked you?" He already suspected the answer, but he needed confirmation. Both survivors' eyes widened with terror. Their voices trembled in unison as they croaked, "The Ghost Sword." At that name, Nagashima felt his stomach twist. He had intended to press on and support their ally, but now protecting their team was the only priority. Before he could issue further orders, a thunderous explosion rocked the clearing, followed by panicked screams from deeper in the woods. Another squad had been struck. Nagashima's face went stone cold. He spun to the Jonin at his side. "Hanagi, radio all teams. Abort the mission. Fall back to base immediately." With that, he rose, scanning the tree line where Ghost Sword had disappeared. The rescue would have to wait. Survival came first. From now on, each squad will rendezvous nearby. We can't let the enemy pick us off one by one. "Aye, Captain." Yamashita Hanagi replied with crisp formality and hurried off. At that moment, an explosion ripped through the silent forest. Nathan yanked his dagger free from the chest of the fallen Iwagakure Chunin, then paused to peer into the empty tree line. A faint smile curled at his lips. Such a shame. Ever since infiltrating Iwagakure undercover, he'd spotted Nagashima Tomohisa walking alongside Lao Zi and immediately recognized him as a commander. Eliminating him now would throw the enemy forces on the mountain into disarray. That had been the plan: feign vulnerability and lure Tomohisa into pursuit. Had the commander taken the bait, Nathan would have unleashed his full strength and ended him in an instant. But Tomohisa was too cautious, refusing to follow. Nathan felt only a brief flicker of disappointment. After all, however capable these rock ninjas might be, even their leaders posed no real threat to him. If they wouldn't chase, then so be it. He sheathed his dagger and vanished deeper into the forest's shadow. Nathan holstered his short sword and vaulted into the treetops, surveying the battlefield below. He fixed his gaze on one of the rock ninja squads and dropped down, cutting them down in an instant, eliminating the threat before Kiku Yamanaka and her team could even spring into action. Each fallen enemy restored a portion of the chakra he'd lost battling Lao Zi, bringing him back to full strength. When Kiku and her comrades finally moved in, Nathan deliberately held back, spacing out his strikes. Every so often, he'd channel a burst of yang-release chakra with his celestial palm technique, hardening his limbs, but mostly giving himself a moment's rest. It wasn't that he wanted to shift the burden onto Kiku's team. His eyes were fixed on the far more crucial duel between Lao Zi and Namikaze Minato. The outcome of that fight would decide the day. As for these rock ninjas, they weren't insignificant, but they weren't the deciding factor, so he spared as many as he could. Nathan didn't look down on Kiku or her squad. They were valuable allies. He simply knew where the real battle lay, and he refused to squander his strength on anything less. In the blink of an eye, nearly half an hour had slipped away. Outside, the great battle still raged, and within the cavernous chamber, Nathan's struggle against the Four Tails pressed on just as fiercely. After more than 20 minutes of relentless combat, Nathan's strength was visibly ebbing. The beast's chakra that once roared around him had grown faint. Its breath, once a thunderous howl, now whispered weakly against his senses. Everyone could feel it, not just Nathan himself, but Namikaze Minato and Gamabunta as well. If this wore on, they were certain he would be overwhelmed. They braced themselves, ready to rush in and prevent any rash escape. Yet in that moment of apparent weakness, something unexpected happened. Whether it was the relentless pressure of the Four Tails' will wearing down Nathan's own resolve, or a calculated act born of desperation, he tore at the seal binding the beast. With a crack that echoed through the chamber, the Four Tails broke free. Its chains shattered and its fury was unbound. Now, uncontrolled and roaring in triumph, the four-tailed beast surged forth, its power no longer contained by any mortal hand. Roar! A thunderous roar split the air. Laozi's two chakra tails abruptly doubled in number, solidifying from ephemeral energy into four massive crimson limbs. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh! The tails lashed out, weaving themselves into an unbreakable net that cut off Minato Namikaze's path just as he prepared his sealing jutsu. Minato ducked back behind the wounded Gamabunta and muttered, "This is bad." The great Toad Prince, panting under his own injuries, gave a solemn nod. "Indeed it is." A gust of wind heralded another arrival. Nathan appeared at Minato's side, his Sharingan eyes narrowing as he took in the partially transformed beast before them. "Should we pull back?" he asked quietly. "This creature's too powerful. Let the Hidden Rock Village handle it." Minato turned to him, eyebrows raised. He'd expected bold confidence from the young Uchiha, never hesitation. Even now, Nathan's power was clear, yet he seemed unwilling to face the enemy without knowing its full strength. For a moment, the two shinobi regarded each other in silence, the fate of their village, and perhaps the entire battlefield, hanging in the balance. I never expected Nathan to be so level-headed. He only suggested retreat once he sensed the danger, but in truth there was no safe way out. It wasn't that Minato Namikaze fancied himself a martyr, willing to face the Four Tails alone. It was simply that the beast had locked its gaze on him. If Minato fled, the tailed beast's fury would spill over onto everyone else. And with shinobi from the Hidden Rock Village here, plus Konoha's forces, there were too many lives at stake for him to abandon the field. So Minato made his decision. "I'll stay and keep it occupied," he said, voice steady. "You all must fall back now." Nathan, cool and composed even in the face of a rampaging tailed beast, gave a curt nod. As he activated his body flicker technique and vanished, Minato watched him go, still pristine despite the chaos around them. For a moment, Minato Namikaze simply stood there, at a loss for words. Chapter 244, Revised. Somewhere deep in the forest, Nathan stood motionless, his eyes fixed on the looming form of the four-tailed fox. Even larger than Gamabunta, its massive frame pulsed with devastating chakra. Nathan's mind raced. If he could ever tame a beast like this, it would serve as the ultimate chakra battery. Suddenly, the fox unleashed a thunderous roar, pounding its broad chest with both forearms, an outburst of years spent confined. At that very instant, a swirling water projectile hurtled toward its head. With contemptuous ease, the fox slapped it aside and pivoted toward Gamabunta. "Foolish toad!" it bellowed, voice rumbling like an earthquake. "You're asking for death!" With a powerful swing, the fox's fist drove toward Gamabunta. The giant toad barely managed to leap aside, and the blow crashed into the forest floor with a seismic impact. Trees shuddered, birds scattered, and a deafening crack split the air. Then, as if the punch had ripped open the very earth, molten magma surged upward through newly formed fissures. Infused with the fox's raw chakra, the glowing lava sprayed in all directions, hissing as it scorched the undergrowth. Nathan's heart pounded. The battle had only just begun, and already the forest itself had become a war zone. Nathan watched from a safe distance, his heart pounding as the four tails erupted like a living volcano. Rivers of molten magma pulsed along its fox-like body, casting an infernal glow across the battlefield. A thunderous roar shook the air. No one could deny this monstrous creature was nothing short of a walking cataclysm. With a sudden heave, the tailed beast wrapped itself in seething magma and morphed into a towering gorilla of flame. It charged at Gamabunta with earth-shattering force. Nathan felt a cold bead of sweat trickle down his temple. Gamabunta was in serious trouble. He forced himself to focus, snapping his gaze back toward Yamanaka Kiku's position. 2 minutes later, the entire mountain trembled as if in tremor with the Four Tails' fury. From his vantage point, Nathan saw Kiku flanked by Konoha Shinobi, locked in a tense standoff against a squad of hidden stone fighters. Yet each clash of steel carried a vague hesitation. Every so often, combatants on both sides risked glances back toward the inferno in the distance, where Minato Namikaze had just appeared beside the Toad Lord. With such a catastrophic battle raging, neither side found the heart to press their skirmish fully. The lingering sword strikes and restrained jutsu told Nathan all he needed to know. They hated each other, but survival came first. In one swift motion, Nathan materialized beside Kiku. He drew his blade, wind whispering along its edge, and lunged in to deliver the opening strike. Nathan's blade sliced through the chaos faster than his opponent could react. The Iwagakure Jonin, facing him, barely had time to register the attack before a kunai drove cleanly through his right arm, pinning him against shattered stone. "Who?" the Jonin gasped, stumbling back in shock and pain. Even Lieutenant Kiku Yamanaka flinched at Nathan's sudden, ruthless precision. The air crackled with tension as debris and dust settled around them. Nathan didn't pause to savor his advantage. He turned to Kiku, voice crisp and commanding. "Send a signal to every unit. Muster at the extraction point and prepare for immediate evacuation." "Evacuate?" Kiku echoed, wide-eyed, then snapped to attention. She began weaving the hand seals for a mass communication jutsu. Mid-seal, she froze, concern flashing across her features. "Captain, the wounded at the second defensive line. They're still out there." Nathan's jaw tightened. He'd ordered those injured shinobi to hold their position until reinforcements arrived. He wouldn't abandon them. "No one's left behind," he said firmly. "Dispatch the medics to them at once and update the evac notice. We're delaying departure until every soul is accounted for." Kiku bowed sharply and vanished in a swirl of chakra, her voice carrying Nathan's orders across the left field. As dust swirled and distant shouts echoed, Nathan steadied himself, determined that every comrade under his command would survive the retreat. After a moment's thought, Nathan said, "Don't wait for reinforcements. Tell everyone to evacuate, then round up a few extra hands so we can move the wounded together." "Right away, Captain." Kiku nodded and ran through the casualty count and survivor roster in her mind. Then she activated her mind transmission technique, silently relaying Nathan's orders to the rest of the unit. Around them, the battlefield roared with chaos, but the senior Iwagakure shinobi stationed nearby heard nothing of their conversation. He only caught a glimpse of Nathan speaking to Kiku before the two slipped away. At once, the Konoha ninjas began falling back in disciplined lines. The Iwagakure troops watched them depart and, though they'd had the opportunity to press their attack earlier, chose not to intervene. Neither side was in any mood for more bloodshed, especially with the four-tailed Jinchuriki's rampage still unchecked. The tremors and debris clouding the valley made it impossible to conceal the scale of the fight from the Iwagakure forces below. Within moments, their own commanders ordered a full retreat as well. However, Iwagakure's commanders weren't about to abandon the mission. A number of veteran shinobi were ordered to remain behind and coordinate with the incoming support teams. After pulling its mid- and lower-ranking forces out of the field, Iwagakure had dispatched a contingent of its finest generals, fully prepared to handle whatever fallout the battle might bring. After all, they had been bold enough to deploy both the Four Tails and the Five Tails Jinchuriki, and they couldn't risk losing control of either. Their immediate priority was to subdue the rampaging Four Tails. Leaving the problem for Konoha to solve was simply not an option. If that beast had run wild back in Fenglyu Town, Iwagakure might have let Konoha deal with the cleanup. But now the Four Tails had retreated up the mountain behind the village, and if they hesitated long enough for a Konoha shinobi to intercept it first, all manner of complications could arise. Despite its fearsome power, the Four Tails was hardly invincible in the eyes of the five great nations. With the right strategy and sufficient manpower, capturing it was by no means impossible. That was why Iwagakure couldn't allow the Four Tails Jinchuriki to roam unchecked. Recovery teams were dispatched at once to bring him back under control. Unbeknownst to them, Konoha's scouts had already detected these movements, and now the Hidden Leaf was preparing to make its own play. Omura Yuito didn't hesitate to unleash his finest operatives, but he wasn't after the Four Tails itself. His real aim was to bog down Iwagakure in a costly struggle, bleeding the village dry. And so began a desperate tug-of-war over Nathan, the runaway Four Tails Jinchuriki. From the first light of dawn straight through until dusk, and then again from dusk until the next evening, neither side gave quarter. The heart of the fighting was the battle to control Nathan, but the bloodiest clashes sprang up across a 5-kilometer ring surrounding him. In that outer zone, squads of shinobi lay in wait, launching ambush after ambush, each strike answered by a lethal counterattack. Every life lost served the same grim purpose, to keep the central battlefield balanced, no matter how high the price. By the time the sun set on the second day, Iwagakure finally secured Nathan and his immense tailed beast power. Yet Konoha needn't despair. Yuito's interference had savaged the Rock Village's elite forces, ensuring that even in defeat, the Leaf Village reaped its own hard-won advantage. The deaths of Iwagakure's sealing and barrier specialists were a blow the Hidden Rock Village could scarcely afford. Without those experts, the village would have to handle the Four Tails and Five Tails Jinchuriki with extreme caution, lest they lose control again and suffer irreparable damage. It was clear that, after such a costly battle, both Iwagakure and Konoha would retreat into a more conservative posture. Their forces had been drained, and both villages urgently needed time to recover. Another large-scale conflict seemed highly unlikely. For Nathan, this lull could not have come at a better moment. He needed a stable environment in which to rebuild his strength, and in less than 2 weeks, his body was set to undergo a profound transformation. When that change came, everything would be different. Chapter 245, After the War. Nathan climbed the trail back to the Shishan stronghold and froze in place. The mountain he knew so well had been utterly transformed by last night's battle. Where once dense stands of pine and fir had flourished, now jagged columns of crystallized lava thrust toward the sky. Gigantic fissures yawned across the slopes, scars carved by colossal earth-release jutsu that had pulverized ridges and sent boulders crashing into the valleys below. In every direction, the echoes of combat still lingered, turning the familiar landscape into a hostile new world. He paused to take it all in, then turned to Yamanaka Ju, who was bringing up the rear of their squad. "Ju, I want a recon team out there immediately," Nathan ordered. "Map every choke point, every collapsed ledge. We need a fresh defensive plan by nightfall." "Right away, Captain," Ju replied without hesitation, but his voice was thin, his posture unsteady, as though he were still fighting an invisible fever. Nathan frowned. They had retreated from the central front just in time to avoid the climax of the Four Tails engagement, yet the peripheral clashes had been brutal nonetheless. Ju and several others had barely escaped intact. "Take someone you trust," Nathan added quietly, "and move fast. We can't afford any surprises." Ju nodded, cheeks paling, and hurried off to gather his team. Nathan watched him go, then turned back to survey the ruined peaks. The work ahead would be daunting, and not a moment to lose. Nathan watched anxiously as the medics tended to Yamanaka Kiku's chest wound. Despite his best efforts with medical ninjutsu, the injury hadn't fully healed. There simply hadn't been enough time. In the past, a heart wound like this would have required several days of rest. Now, with Konoha's defenses stretched thin after yesterday's devastating battle, even lightly wounded shinobi were being sent back to the front lines. He could not afford to let anyone stay behind. Once the last of the injured had departed, Nathan rose and made his way back to what had once been his home. Where a simple wooden cottage once stood there was now nothing but smoldering remnants. The familiar walls, the worn floorboards, everything had been reduced to ash. Nathan didn't bother with false bravado. Instead, he found a large boulder, hardened lava from earlier eruptions, and settled himself upon it. Drawing a deep breath, Nathan formed the complex hand seals for the palm immortal technique. He called upon his pure yang escape chakra, feeling it gather at his core before it spread outwards in warm, invigorating waves. As his body strengthened, his mind raced. He couldn't waste a single moment of this brief lull in the fighting. First and foremost, he would continue refining his physical power. Every second counted. With that resolve burning in his chest, Nathan closed his eyes and let the technique work its formidable magic. Nathan reviewed his priorities. First on his list was gathering everything he could on developing a water-nature chakra, especially water-style escape techniques. He didn't have the luxury to start cultivating water chakra right now, but once he finished this current phase of training, he needed to hit the ground running. Better to assemble scrolls, jutsu schematics, and library leads in advance than to scramble at the last minute. His third and final task was to upgrade his weapon. As his power grew, the little short sword he carried, incapable of conducting chakra, had become a serious liability, capping his combat potential. He couldn't afford that handicap against stronger opponents, so he resolved to replace it as soon as possible. Nathan knew exactly what he wanted: the legendary Kusanagi sword, one of the rarest blades in the shinobi world. Fortuitously, the Uchiha clan could assist him on both fronts. As a storied family with wealth stretching back generations, they possessed abundant jutsu scrolls and specialized knowledge. And when it came to rare weapons, their network was unrivaled. Nathan had been planning this alliance for some time. Now it was simply a matter of putting it into motion. Compared to personally chasing every lead, tapping into the Uchiha clan's intelligence network made far more sense. As one of their rising stars, Nathan was confident that neither the conservative elders nor the radical faction would turn down his request. 3 minutes later, he opened his eyes. He resisted the urge to reinforce his body with the palm immortal technique, and instead reached for brush and parchment. With careful strokes, he drafted a concise letter, summoning clan agents to help him locate what he sought, and arranging for the next supply convoy to carry his message back home. When he finished, he slipped the sealed letter into a leather pouch and stored it safely in his pack. He only needed to wait 2 days. That was when the Uchiha supply convoy would arrive from base camp. Then his request would be on its way. A week passed in silence. Early March brought a subtle shift in the mountain air, and Nathan could feel his body inching toward its final transformation. At any moment, within 7 days at most, he would complete the change. His pulse quickened at the thought. Soon, high on the windswept slope, Nathan sat in meditation, drawing in the chill air and letting his mind clear. "Almost there," he murmured, barely audible above the whistle of the wind. Then, the crisp crunch of footsteps on stone broke the mountain stillness. Someone was coming. Nathan straightened his posture and watched as several Konoha Chunin emerged from behind the jagged lava crystals. These were his direct subordinates, assigned to patrol the sector. As they approached, Nathan asked, "Anything unusual to report?" One of the Chunin shook his head. "No, sir." Nathan nodded, unsurprised. Ever since last week's battle, the Iwagakure Shinobi had noticeably dialed back their offensive operations. Large-scale assaults had vanished, and even minor skirmishes were rare. In the past 7 days, they'd only caught sight of an enemy patrol a handful of times. And whenever the rock ninjas realized they'd been spotted, they'd melted away at once, turning potential fights into one-sided chases. A straight-up clash was all but unheard of. Still, a week's lull didn't guarantee lasting peace. Nathan let his gaze drift over the barren landscape, rough, scorched earth dotted with smoking fissures, and then met his men's eyes. "Stay alert," he warned. "Iwagakure may be regrouping. They could strike again without warning." With that, he dismissed them to resume their watch, every sense on high alert for the next move. "Be careful on patrol," Captain Yuito warned as he dismissed them. "Yes, Captain!" The Konoha Chunin responded in unison, their voices full of surprise and respect. Nathan lifted a hand to halt their questions. "All right, let's move on to the next sector." With that, he took off at a run toward the forested ridge. A handful of Chunin flanked him, weaving silently through the underbrush. Soon they reached the designated area. Without waiting for further orders, the Chunin dispersed, combing every trail and clearing in search of threats. Nathan himself found a secluded glade and settled into a meditative stance. Drawing on his palm immortal technique, he condensed his yang escape chakra, channeling it into his limbs to strengthen his body and refine his control. Day turned into night, and night back into day, as he persisted in this discipline. 3 days later, at dusk, Nathan returned from patrol to his mountaintop dwelling. Before he could even set down his pack, a knock came at the door. Knock, knock, knock. He glanced at the door impatiently. Come in. A young Konoha Chunin stepped inside, bowing crisply. Jonin Nathan, Captain Yuito has called all the Jonins to a meeting. Nathan pushed himself to his feet, smoothing the front of his jacket. Lead the way, he said coolly, ready to learn what awaited them at headquarters. This is the warrant. The Konoha Chunin spoke evenly, neither obsequious nor arrogant, as he produced a handwritten summons from his sleeve. Nathan took the parchment, scanned its contents, and then nodded. When does it take effect? In half an hour, the Chunin replied. All right, Nathan said, folding the warrant neatly. You're dismissed. Carry on with your duties. With a brief nod, the ninja stepped out of the wooden hut, performed the body flicker technique, and disappeared in a blink. Chapter 246. Restart. Calling all Jonin to a meeting? Could it have something to do with Iwagakure? Nathan murmured, watching the Konoha Chunin disappear down the hallway. His suspicion wasn't random. Nothing short of a major incident involving the Hidden Stone Village would prompt Omura Yuito to gather every Jonin at once. Over the past few days, rumors had swirled that Iwagakure was preparing to reignite the war. On his routine patrols, Nathan's subordinates had reported a spike in enemy infiltration activity. Iwa operatives were probing the Land of Fire's defenses more aggressively than ever. All evidence pointed to an imminent attack. With that in mind, Yuito's sudden summons left Nathan with little doubt about its purpose. And it wasn't good news. A fresh conflict meant chaos, shattered stability, and a serious disruption to Nathan's own training. Nathan closed his eyes and tuned into the faint stirrings of chakra within him. By his estimate, it would take another 3 or 4 days for his body to finish accumulating its foundation and trigger the next stage of transformation. What a shame, he thought, a twinge of disappointment tightening his chest. He shook off the regret. Forming a precise hand seal, he unleashed the palm immortal technique. Pure yang escape chakra blossomed into being, then coursed smoothly through his limbs. After a few repetitions, Nathan sensed the ritual drawing to a close. He rose, found Yamanaka Kiku, and relayed the essential details of his progress. With nothing left to do here, he made his way down the mountain toward the appointed meeting place. At the Fenglu town stronghold, Nathan slipped into the conference hall just as the hour struck. He took his seat moments before Yuito Omura arrived, and the meeting began without delay. True to Nathan's expectations, the agenda revolved around the latest movements of the Iwa Shinobi. Yet one revelation caught him off guard. The Iwa had no plans for a single, concentrated strike. Instead, they intended to split their forces and launch simultaneous attacks on several neighboring fortresses. Is this intelligence solid? After Omura Yuito finished his report, one of the Jonin frowned and spoke up, his gaze sweeping the table. The others turned to Yuito, waiting. He met their stares and nodded firmly. Absolutely, I have no doubt. He didn't name his source, but these were seasoned Jonin. None would be taken in by vague claims. They realized at once that Iwagakure must have an insider feeding them information, someone both Yuito and the village elders trusted implicitly. The implication was clear. Iwa was about to thin out its defenses. Why would they do that? A murmur of uncertainty ran around the room. All except Nathan, whose mind was already racing. He'd seen this play before, not because he was faster than the others, but because the pattern was too familiar. The last time the enemy had abandoned their frontline fortress, it was only after their supporting strongholds had been quietly pulled back, leaving the main garrison isolated and vulnerable. Once cut off, they'd had no choice but to fall back. And now, Iwagakure was setting the same trap again. Nathan's plan was clear. Seize the Iwa strongholds ringing Fenglu town, isolate the settlement, then turn up the pressure. If the maneuver worked, and given the town's exposed position, It very well might. The defenders could be overwhelmed before they even considered a counterattack. Nathan couldn't shake a nagging thought, though. The strategist who had driven them into retreat before seemed almost too skilled to be anyone but the same commander now leading the Iwa forces. Whether or not that was true, it didn't change the task at hand. As Nathan laid out the enemy's gambit, the other Jonin fell into thoughtful silence. They'd arrived at the same conclusion in minutes. Fengliu was in peril of being strangled off the map, and now all hands were scrambling to devise a defense. Their real weakness wasn't intelligence or willpower, but manpower. 2 grueling years of war had taken a brutal toll on Konoha's shinobi ranks. Every front was dangerously understaffed. No matter how cunning the Iwa commander's deployments, hundreds or even thousands of troops at each stronghold, Konoha simply didn't have enough fighters left to meet them head-on. Now the question was which sacrifices they were ready to make in order to hold the line. In truth, over the past month, the neighboring fortresses had poured reinforcements into Fengliu Town's defenses, stripping their own walls bare in the process. With no way to shore up every position at once, the commanders opted for a stopgap, divide their forces and spread them across the surrounding strongholds. By doing so, they hoped to prevent any one outpost from falling and leaving Fengliu Town isolated. When the strategy meeting adjourned, Nathan rode back to the Shishan stronghold. There, he gathered a handful of his most trusted shinobi and linked up with the contingent Omura Yuito had assigned to him, bringing his total strength to nearly 100. Their destination was a smaller fortress about 20 kilometers southeast of Fengliu Town, one of several outposts now deemed critical to the overall defense. Nathan learned he wasn't alone in this mission. A handful of other Jonin with solid reputations had been tasked with similar detachments. Clearly, Yuito Omura intended to use these veteran teams to offset the numerical disadvantage faced by the Konoha ninjas across the region. Nathan had no objections. Once his men were mounted and provisions loaded, he led them out of Shishan under a gray dawn sky, determined to hold the southeastern line against whatever threats might come. Nathan led his support squad on a wide, covert circuit through the hills. Under the cover of darkness, they finally reached their objective, the Xiaogu village fortress. As its name suggests, this stronghold occupied the old settlement of Xiaogu village, a modest hamlet that once sheltered 700 or 800 villagers. In the wake of the Ninja World War, however, the original residents had long since fled. Only a garrison of roughly 150 Konoha shinobi remained to hold the lines. With Nathan's 100 reinforcements slipped in under the cloak of night, the fortress suddenly boasted 300 defenders, an impressive bulwark against any assault. Thanks to timely intelligence, they'd avoided detection. If the rock ninjas pressed their attack now, they would walk into a trap, divided and vulnerable. By dawn, Nathan and his support team had vanished as quietly as they'd come. Patrols continued on schedule, and the original garrison maintained every routine, guard rotations, perimeter sweeps, supply checks, just as before. From the enemy's vantage point, nothing had changed. All that remained was to wait and see. Would the rock ninjas take the bait? Nathan watched the days slip by without a sign of the rock ninjas. Sunrise gave way to sunset, and one full day passed, then another. Yet still there was no enemy assault. He felt no panic. According to Omura Yuito's informants, the enemy would strike within 3 days. All he needed now was patience. In the meantime, he seized every quiet hour to push his body harder, honing his strength and deepening his reserves. On the third night, that uneasy peace finally shattered. A thunderous blast ripped through the village, setting off alarms and sending villagers scrambling for cover. But unlike many places caught unawares, Nathan's settlement had anticipated trouble. Though the explosion shook every shingled rooftop, no one gave in to terror. Far beyond the wooden palisades, in the rocky hills that ringed the village, a lone figure stood over a ruined scouting post. His dark cloak marked him as a special jonin of Iwagakure, and his eyes were cold as he surveyed the lifeless form of a Konoha chunin. A detonating talisman had twisted the young shinobi's body beyond recognition. The jonin's lips curled into a grim smirk. His mission was simple: eliminate any sentry and pave the way for the rock ninja's invasion. He had been certain of a swift, One strike kill. And at the last moment, the Chunin had reacted faster than expected, dodging the first wave and buying just enough time that the Jonin's perfect plan unraveled. As he pocketed the spent talisman scrolls, the Jonin's expression darkened. Tonight's failure would not go unpunished, and once the rock ninjas arrived, they would seek retribution on every corner of this village. Nathan, wherever he was about to discover just how swiftly war could descend. In the end, the enemy even ignited a suicide talisman, trying to take Nathan with him, but Nathan's reflexes were too quick. He managed to defuse the device just in time. Still, the blast that followed was loud enough to blow their cover. Fortunately, we'd come prepared. Our force outnumbered theirs at least 2-1, and with sheer strength on our side, victory was all but assured. "Move out, full speed," the special Jonin of Iwagakure ordered. Instantly, our squad surged forward toward Odani village. Moments later, other Iwagakure teams, alerted by the explosion, realized the mission had been compromised. Without hesitation, they too raced toward the village, determined to overwhelm any resistance. Chapter 247, Deterrence, Boom. A massive explosion shattered the stillness of the night. In Xiaogu village, Nathan's eyes snapped open. He seized the dagger from beneath his pillow and bolted outside, vaulting onto the roof in one fluid motion. From this height, the village's highest point, he could survey the surrounding countryside, even under the cloak of darkness. Nighttime was no obstacle. With a single thought, his pupils flared blood red, and 3 magatamas spun within each iris, the unmistakable sign of his awakened Sharingan. Moonlight glinted off his blade as he peered toward the blast's origin. There, a squad of Iwa Shinobi was already closing in on the village. Nathan shifted his gaze, catching sight of more enemy forces converging from other directions. "Finally," he murmured. Back in the village, the ninja who had awakened alongside him rallied at once. They'd been warned this attack might come. Calmly and without confusion, each group fell into its prearranged formation and scrambled to its assigned position, as if they'd rehearsed every move. What Nathan still hadn't seen, however, was the support team he'd requested. They were conspicuously absent, and the danger was closing in fast. As the sun dipped below the ridge, a thunderous boom split the air, the signal for the Iwagakure shinobi to strike. In the span of 10 seconds, concealed explosive tags detonated across the field, their blasts echoing like distant thunder. In an instant, the battlefield was a whirlwind of clashing steel and flying chakra, kunai ricocheting off stone walls, shurikens slicing through smoke, and the desperate cries of injured warriors reverberating in every direction. The uproar was bone-chilling, yet neither side faltered. On one flank, fewer than 200 Leaf Village defenders held the Xiaotani stronghold against an enemy force twice their size. Their stance was immovable, proof of Konoha's unbreakable will. Watching from the rear, the commanding Iwagakure Jonin's brow creased in reluctant admiration. He knew this stalemate couldn't last forever. Sooner or later, fatigue and attrition would wear down the defenders. A single lapse could unravel the entire line. He scanned the chaotic front, voice low and resolute. "Just make sure we don't let too many of them slip away." Captain Kurokawa Ichiro was just about to order his men to begin post-battle preparations when a breathless Iwagakure special Jonin came running up. "Captain," he gasped, "there's a problem." Ichiro's heart skipped a beat. "What is it?" he demanded, narrowing his eyes. The Jonin swallowed and gave a solemn nod. "I've detected an enemy force still hiding in Otani village." Ichiro's brow shot up. "How many?" "Roughly 100. 100. Ichiro murmured, tasting the words. He quickly ran the numbers in his head. Even with another 100 Leaf Shinobi in play, Konoha's forces would still be outnumbered by his own. He allowed himself a small, confident smile. As for the quality of those fighters, the Rock Village's ninjas had long been viewed as the weakest among the 5 great shinobi villages, yet more than 2 years of brutal, survival-of-the-fittest combat had honed them nearly to par with the others. Moreover, every rock ninja he'd brought on this mission was handpicked for their elite skills. Still, a hidden force of 100 meant extra complications. Ichiro squared his shoulders. "Very well," he said. "Alert the units stationed at the village edge. Move out at once, but proceed with caution. I want those spots scouted and secured before nightfall." The special Jonin saluted and sprinted off. Ichiro turned back to the encampment, mind already racing through strategies. Hidden enemies or not, he would ensure victory, and nothing would undermine his plans for the aftermath of this war. Nathan remained calm. Lieutenant Kurokawa Ichiro, his second-in-command, stood nearby, unconcerned. He was just about to signal the front line to ease their assault, hoping to gauge the enemy's next move, when Nathan raised a hand. "Hold that order," he said. His concealed reinforcements were already advancing. Earlier, Nathan had deliberately kept those troops in reserve. If the Iwa ninja caught sight of fresh forces arriving, they'd slip away, and his trap would be lost. Better to box them in completely than scare them off at the first sign of reinforcements. Since these Iwa operatives had dared to join the fray, Nathan intended to pin them down, and he wasn't about to let them slip by under his watchful eyes. Any additional Iwa reinforcements could be handled later. The cluster before him demanded immediate attention. As luck would have it, the Iwa ninja had become entangled with Konoha's shinobi from the Kotani village stronghold, making any retreat virtually impossible. With a decisive nod, Nathan gave the final command: support teams, advance, surround, and eliminate them. Nathan had anticipated this moment. As the Iwagakure shinobi in the field reeled from the sudden shift, the crushing pressure on the Konoha forces defending the Otani village stronghold eased almost instantly. For a heartbeat, Konoha held the upper hand, though Nathan knew it wouldn't last on its own. Without hesitation, he vaulted from the rooftop and vanished, teleporting in a blur across the battlefield. In the next instant, he materialized behind an Iwagakure jonin, his blade flashing in a deadly arc. The sword bit deep into the man's left arm, slicing through flesh until bone gleamed in the ragged wound. A strangled groan escaped the wounded jonin. Reflexively, he spun and angled his kunai to intercept a second incoming attack, a throw from a nearby Konoha shinobi, which clanged harmlessly aside. Then he stumbled backward, buying himself precious moments of distance and breath. Only then did he register who had struck him. Recognition widened his eyes. His pupils snapped shut in panic as he let loose a half-formed curse. But even as he squeezed his eyelids tight, it was already too late. Nathan was gone, leaving behind only the dagger-thin scar that marked his presence. The moment their eyes met, Nathan raised his hand and activated his illusion Sharingan, instantly plunging the Iwagakure jonin into a disorienting genjutsu. Swish, swish, swish. 3 razor-sharp shuriken tore through the air, covering nearly 10 meters in the blink of an eye. With deadly precision, they struck the jonin in the throat, the heart, and the lower abdomen. The jonin convulsed as the illusion shattered. He collapsed to his knees, barely able to utter a strangled whimper. To any onlooker, Nathan's movements might have looked effortless, but every gesture was meticulously calculated, from the angle of each throw to the placement of his feet. Even if his opening attack had failed to kill, the genjutsu would have guaranteed a final blow the moment the jonin began groping blindly for his assailant. In truth, the jonin did dodge Nathan's first volley of hidden weapons. Blinded by panic and unaware of Nathan's true identity, he searched desperately for his attacker and stumbled straight into the trap. Within seconds, the Iwagakure warrior lay dead, a testament to the ruthless precision of Nathan's illusion, Sharingan. Nathan faced his opponent without a trace of hesitation. In truth, this outcome had been inevitable from the moment the Iwagakure jonin set foot on the battleground. The Stone Village shinobi was a specialist with a narrowly focused skill set, while Nathan's mastery of the illusion Sharingan had long since reached flawless perfection. Most Uchiha would struggle to activate their genjutsu Sharingan in the blink of an eye. Any slight hesitation gives an alert opponent a chance to dodge or counter. Not Nathan. He moved faster than thought itself. By the time the jonin realized what was happening, Nathan's eyes had already ensnared him in a world of illusion. The attack struck true, and the Iwagakure ninja collapsed, life extinguished before anyone could react. Around Nathan, Konoha's forces erupted in cheers. Their confidence surged, their movements crisp and determined. Across the field, the morale of the Iwagakure shinobi shattered. They could barely muster 70% of their usual strength. This was exactly Nathan's plan. When you're outnumbered, the only way to win is to eliminate the enemy's top combatants at the outset. A single decisive strike not only levels the numerical odds, but also cripples the opposing will to fight, boosting your own allies and leaving your foes reeling. Tonight, that strategy had paid off in full. This way, Konoha can keep up the pressure. Chapter 248, The Hunt. Bang! Nathan tore his gaze away from the fallen Iwagakure Jonin at his feet and swept the battlefield with calm precision. Anyone who caught his eyes immediately looked away. No one dared challenge the intensity of his Sharingan. He ignored them. Now was not the time to charge aimlessly behind enemy lines or to clash with Iwagakure's Jinin. Surrounded on all sides by both friend and foe, he had to honor the unspoken rules of engagement. The Jinin on either side were effectively off-limits until the Jonin had been dealt with. If he struck first at the younger ninja, the enemy Jonin would surely retaliate, and Konoha's lower-ranked shinobi would pay the price. Of course, if he eliminated every enemy Jonin, there'd be no one left to object. With that strategy in mind, Nathan began searching for any remaining Iwagakure Jonin. Then he saw him. A soft breath escaped Nathan's lips as he spotted the figure in the distance. Amid a relentless barrage of attacks from Konoha's Jonin, the Iwagakure shinobi stood unfazed. He swung his fists, massive, stone-like arms that thundered through the air, each blow landing with brutal, petrified force. Konoha's Jonin reeled under the impact, flung backwards as if they'd been struck by boulders. Nathan narrowed his eyes. Those weren't ordinary punches. They were petrified fists, solid as rock. And the enemy Jonin was wielding them with deadly ease, as though he relished every crushing strike. This was the real threat Nathan had been hunting. Nathan's Sharingan revealed the truth in an instant. His opponent wasn't using an earth-release technique to harden his fist. He was literally turning flesh and bone into rock. Within seconds, the man's entire body took on the appearance of a living stone statue. When the Konoha Jonin struck him, the impact carved deep craters into his rocky hide, yet did no lasting harm. Even those gouges vanished almost immediately, sealed by sudden surges of chakra. His regenerative power was off the charts. This has to be a Kekkei Genkai, Nathan thought. In the shinobi world, some Kekkei Genkai arise from blending two chakra natures, like lava release, boil release, or ice release. Others are pure bloodline limits, the Uchiha's Sharingan, the Hyuga's Byakugan, or the Kaguya's Shikotsumyaku, to name a few. Beyond these well-known abilities, there are even rarer, more unstable bloodline traits, powers that manifest under special circumstances or fade as quickly as they appear. For example, consider the Ibri clan, Orochimaru's long-suffering test subjects. They can turn their bodies to smoke, slip inside an opponent's form, seize control of their actions, or tear them apart from within. It's undeniably formidable, but utterly unstable. At any moment, an Ibri ninja can dissipate into mist, and once the wind scatters their particles, they lose cohesion and die. Likewise, this obscure petrification technique conceals its own critical flaws. From what Nathan has observed so far, he's pinpointed more than one weakness. First, the moment a shinobi is frozen solid, his awareness of the battlefield all but evaporates. The Iwagakure Jonin Nathan petrified should have dodged countless incoming strikes, but he simply didn't. Nathan's not fooled into thinking it was overconfidence in his defenses. In fact, the victim still possessed the physical ability to evade. The problem lay elsewhere. Two factors, to be exact. One, the stony shell left him with the intention to dodge, but robbed him of the actual reflexes to do so. The second reason follows. Nathan realized that every one of those superficial wounds was nothing more than chakra wasted. No skilled shinobi would expend precious reserves on meaningless scratches, unless they simply couldn't help it. Clearly, the Iwagakure Jonin before him fell into that second category. The moment his body hardened, his senses dulled, his reflexes slowed so much that he could only strike with wild, sweeping attacks. In contrast, the Konoha Jonin danced just out of range, chipping away at his chakra with swift, pinpoint jabs. If this continued unchecked, without reinforcements, the Iwa Jonin would collapse from exhaustion. Nathan shook his head. He'd never heard of such a flawed bloodline limit in his previous life. Suppressing a smirk, he gathered chakra into his feet and activated the instant body technique. In the span of a heartbeat, he ghosted past the flailing Jonin's defenses and materialized directly in front of him. Based on his opponent's formidable defenses, Nathan knew that even a surprise strike with his chakra-drained short sword wouldn't break through. Instead, he decided to materialize directly before him. Fortunately, the petrification spell had left the target sluggish, and Nathan seized the chance to trap him in an illusion and finish him off. The moment Nathan appeared, his foe froze in shock. By the time he registered Nathan's 3 Magatama Sharingan and tried to dodge, it was already too late. Genjutsu, Sharingan! Nathan intoned, raising his hand. His fully evolved 3 Magatama eyes flared, yanking the opponent's consciousness into the illusion. Instantly, the man's body locked in place, utterly motionless. At the edge of the clearing, a Konoha Jonin reacted with lightning speed. He slammed a foot into the ground and erupted forward, arriving at Nathan's side in a heartbeat. With 3 swift palm strikes, swish, 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 he pressed detonating tags onto the frozen target. Within seconds, the Jonin had secured his kill. The placement of those explosive tags was anything but random. In addition to slapping 2 of them on the Iwagakure Shinobi's head and chest, the Konoha Jonin had discreetly fixed a 3rd to his calf. Just in case the first pair failed to kill, the last one would surely destroy his ability to stand. Satisfied, he backed away, raised his hand, and in one fluid motion triggered all 3 talismans. Boom! Boom! 3 scarlet fireballs blazed into existence, instantly engulfing the target in a roaring inferno. The shockwave was so fierce it shattered the genjutsu, locking the Jonin in place, but there was no time for recovery before the searing flames crashed over him. A tortured scream pierced the din of battle, drawing every eye toward the charred figure. And then, clear as day, Nathan stepped into view. Hidden until now by his own illusions, he stood unmasked on the field, fully exposed but utterly unafraid. With his strength, not a single Iwagakure Jonin here could hope to challenge him. Let them watch. If anything, his boldness would only rally his comrades' spirits. Nathan exhaled sharply as the last of the flames flickered out. The Iwagakure Jonin lay motionless, but Nathan could still sense a heartbeat, barely. Surviving 3 point-blank explosive tags was testament to the man's potent bloodline limit. Nathan had to admit he'd underestimated him. A split second later, Nathan flicked his wrist. A kunai shot from his hand and buried itself in the Jonin's chest. The blasts had shattered the man's petrification, leaving him nothing more than a normal body, easy prey. The Jonin crumpled, life extinguished. Nathan glanced at the Konoha Jonin beside him and offered a curt nod of acknowledgement. Then, without hesitation, he sprinted off across the smoldering battlefield, ready to hunt down the next rock ninja opponent. Chapter 249, Defeat. 30 minutes into the fray, Nathan drove his blade through the chest of the Iwagakure Jonin before him. It was his 5th kill. 3 Jonin and 2 special Jonin had already fallen to his sword. Now, only 2 elite opponents remained on the Iwagakure side, Commander Ichiro Kurokawa and the sensory special Jonin, who had once brought Nathan that crucial warning. Both were now completely surrounded by Konoha Jonin, their defeat all but certain. Yet Nathan lingered at the edge of the skirmish. He had no intention of claiming every victory. His comrades deserved their moments of glory too. That didn't mean he would stand idly by. From a ruined stone pillar, he surveyed the battlefield, gauging the shifting tides of battle. Inspired by Nathan's ruthless efficiency, the Konoha Shinobi pressed the assault with renewed vigor. Their morale soared, but their numbers were still matched by the enemy. They maintained the pressure, but no decisive breakthrough had yet been achieved. Worse, fatigue was beginning to sap their strength. Heavy breathing and trembling limbs betrayed the toll of relentless combat. If their momentum faltered, Commander Kurokawa and the sensory Jonin might seize the opening and turn the tables. Nathan's eyes narrowed. The collapse of Iwagakure forces seemed imminent, but only if the Konoha ninjas held their ground. One misstep, one moment of hesitation, and the battle could be reversed in an instant. And when that time came, Nathan would be ready. Nathan refused to stand by and watch anymore. If the shinobi of Iwagakure were going to stab their opponents in the back, he would find and eliminate every one of those hidden thorns himself. And since Konoha no longer had the numbers or strength to strike back in kind, the old unwritten rules of engagement no longer applied to him. With that decided, Nathan sprang onto the roof of a nearby building and activated his Sharingan. Instantly, the battlefield opened before his eyes in 1,000 fragmented visions. At one edge of his sight, an Iwagakure ninja, caught off guard, had his throat slit by a Konoha shinobi. At another, a leaf village warrior crumpled to the ground, a kunai buried in his heart, felled by a hidden assailant from Iwagakure. Here, two fighters clashed blade to blade. There, an unsuspecting shinobi was knocked out by a surprise shuriken to the neck. Everywhere he looked, bodies piled up. Limbs twitched, blood soaked the earth, and anguished screams rose in the distance. The war zone encircling Odani village had become a living meat grinder, slicing through fresh lives with brutal efficiency. And yet this was only a minor skirmish compared to the chaos that raged elsewhere on the front. Nathan's gaze sharpened. He would pick these thorns clean, one by one, until Iwagakure's covert killers learned to fear the hunter as much as the hunted. Nathan stood alone amid the ruined plain, the flicker of distant flames illuminating the night. Countless battlefields like this one scarred the ninja world, each a testament to lives lost in a war that spared no one. As he looked out, his vision cut through the darkness, revealing conflicts from every corner. Ninjas from the 5 great villages clashing with one another, fighters from hidden villages scraping for survival in the shadows, and mercenaries prowling for profit. Everyone was caught in the tide of war, willingly or not. No one could stand apart. He exhaled, a single breath heavy with resignation. Without transcending these limits, you're nothing more than an ant, he muttered to himself, left to drift with the current. Shaking off the weight of his thoughts, Nathan refocused. He refused to waste another moment watching senseless bloodshed. It was time to end this battle. He swept his gaze across the battlefield and spotted several Iwagakure Chunin moving in loose formation, their chakra flaring faintly in the night air. With a soft grunt, he readied himself. Within heartbeats, he vanished from sight and reappeared behind one of the unsuspecting Chunin, his presence as silent as a shadow. The night held its breath as Nathan prepared to strike and bring this meaningless conflict to its conclusion. Nathan's dagger cut through the air. Swish! He lunged, aiming a precise stab straight for Chiba Kohei's back. In that instant, a cold alarm blazed in Chiba's mind. Moments before, he'd been dominating 2 Konoha Chunin, but now everything changed. He twisted his body just in time, yet the blade still nicked his flesh, sinking in deep enough to puncture his lung. A burning pain shot through him, stealing his breath. Gritting his teeth, Chiba yanked himself clear of the dagger and dropped into a hand seal. He was about to vanish with the flash body technique, but Nathan closed the distance in a heartbeat. Before Chiba could even take 2 steps, another blade thrust out and pinned his foot, halting him cold. With a startled grunt, Chiba slammed on the brakes and leaped back, evading the blade by the narrowest margin. But Nathan wasn't done. He hammered forward, unleashing 2 more lightning-fast strikes. Swish, swish, each one aimed to bury itself between Chiba's ribs. Trapped in a whirlwind of steel, Chiba Kohei felt death's shadow brushing his shoulders. He couldn't predict Nathan's angle or timing, only react on pure instinct. Missile-like daggers flickered toward him, over a dozen in all, yet Chiba weaved and dodged, surviving each heart-stopping attack. In the eye of that storm, he lived on, his reflexes, his only salvation. Since becoming a shinobi, Nathan had honed an almost preternatural instinct for battle. That gift made his combat skills far exceed those of ordinary fighters. Only recently, he'd single-handedly overwhelmed 2 Konoha Chunin. It also explained how he'd narrowly evaded dozens of strikes the last time they sparred. But back then, he'd been merely toying with his opponent. Now Nathan's face darkened, his hands blurred as he closed the distance in an instant. Caught flat-footed, Chiba Kohei couldn't mount a defense. Before he even realized what was happening, Nathan's light, precise thrust drove the short sword through Kohei's back, snuffing out his life in one clean stroke. A Chunin's limits are clear. Perhaps as a Jonin, Kohei might have learned to counter such lethal instincts, but he was too inexperienced. And now, tragically, he'd never have the chance. With a soft rasp, Nathan slid the blade from his fallen foe's spine, then let Kohei's body collapse to the ground. Nathan didn't have the height advantage. He stood at least a head shorter than the 2 approaching Chunin, but they treated him with the utmost respect and even a trace of awe. "Thank you for your help, Captain," they called out. Their gratitude ran deeper than his daring rescue of Chiba Kohei. Word of how he'd already taken down 5 Iwakure Jonin in succession had spread through the ranks, cementing his reputation for overwhelming strength. Nathan turned to face them and recognized them as reinforcements sent by Omura Yuito. He gave a curt nod. "Go help the others." "Yes, Captain," they replied, then raced off to join the nearby squads. Without missing a beat, Nathan sprinted toward another thorn in Konoha's side, a crafty Iwagakure Chunin who'd been watching him since the skirmish with Kohei. At Nathan's approach, the enemy sprang into action, shouting orders as he summoned several fellow shinobi to trap him. But none of them were Jonin-level warriors. Their numbers meant little. Nathan braced himself, confident that no handful of opponents could match his power. In less than 30 seconds, Nathan cut down one enemy, gravely wounded another, and shattered the coordinated attack of several more. By the 2-minute mark, every threat lay neutralized, though part of that time was spent chasing off the few who fled in terror. Without that pursuit, he would have finished even faster. Refusing to pause, Nathan darted toward the next skirmish. Weaving through the chaos, he singled out the strongest Rock Village shinobi and struck them down one by one. In no time, the morale of the entire rock unit had plummeted. At the same time, his arrival reignited the Konoha ninjas' spirits, their renewed confidence pressing the rock forces even further into disarray. Minute after minute stretched by under mounting tension until Commander Kurokawa Ichiro's voice finally cut through the din. "Retreat!" A sharp, high-pitched whistle sliced across the battlefield. The rock ninjas froze, their faces brightening as if they'd just been delivered from doom. Without another thought, they spun on their heels and fell back toward the field's edge, eager to live and fight another day. Without the senior ninjas to keep them in line, the Konoha forces fell into a disorganized scramble. Seizing the perfect opportunity, the junior shinobi who'd been here all along sprang forward without waiting for orders. In an instant, they were in hot pursuit of the retreating rock ninja. Nathan made no move to join the chase. Instead, his gaze flicked to Kurokawa Ichiro, the perception specialist who had tailed the enemy. The young man lay still and unmoving, killed in the ambush. Even more telling was the sight of the rock ninja himself, clutching the stumps where half an arm had been, stumbling away in panic. As of now, the surprise attack had utterly failed. The lone attacker would have to regroup and recover before trying anything like this again. Chapter 250, Transformation. 3 days passed in the blink of an eye. As Nathan had predicted, the rock ninja never attempted another raid after his first attack failed. Instead, the enemy simply tightened their surveillance around the perimeter, an inconvenience perhaps, but also an unexpected gift of time. With guards posted day and night, Nathan even managed to slip in extra chakra refreshes, so his training never lost momentum. Now, after 72 uninterrupted hours of relentless discipline, his body teetered on the brink of a breakthrough. Late that evening, Nathan lay alone in his small chamber. He opened his eyes and felt the raw vitality coiling within him, ready to explode. First, he took a moment to ensure no one was lurking just outside the door. Satisfied that he was completely alone, he sat up. Hands moving with practiced grace, he wove together a complex sequence of seals. Instantly, he launched into the Palm Immortal technique. A brilliant surge of pure yang chakra crystallized at his core and flooded through his meridians. Nathan felt it snake into every fiber of muscle and strand of nerve, revitalizing him from the inside out. Seconds stretched into an eternity as the energy intensified, heating his blood, sharpening his senses, and filling his mind with a roaring tide of power. He clenched his teeth against the burning force, refusing to yield. This was the final sprint, his one chance to shatter his limits. The light within him flared, nearly blinding, and for an instant, Nathan's world collapsed inward, then exploded outward in a tempest of energy. When the light finally dimmed, he knew he had transformed. Nathan forced his eyes open 3 minutes later and flexed his muscles, hoping for a sign of change, but still nothing. He sighed, formed a hand seal, and unleashed the Palm Immortal technique again, pressing every fiber of his body to its limit. Another 3 minutes passed, and his stock of condensed Yang Escape chakra ebbed away, yet still no tremor of transformation rippled through his bones. Undeterred, Nathan reshaped his fingers into the seal and struck again. Over and over, he invoked the ancient palm art, pouring chakra into his flesh and sinew. 2 hours slipped by in a blur of exertion. He'd thought 7 or 8 trials would be enough for a breakthrough, but he was nearly 40 attempts in now, his reserves nearly exhausted, and his body remained unchanged. Despite the mounting fatigue, he refused to yield. He could almost feel the shift. Just one more push, one more invocation, and his body would finally evolve. Determination flared in his eyes as he braced himself for another round. After a short rest, Nathan let his muscles fully relax, then summoned the Palm Immortal technique again, this time determined to shatter the bottleneck blocking his progress. He unleashed it once, twice, 3 times. Half an hour later, on the 10th strike, an indescribable tide of majestic energy exploded from his core. Nathan felt in an instant that this surge was the culmination of a month's worth of hard training. A gentle warmth coursed through his veins, bathing him in pure comfort. He could almost sense his cells cheering, each one diving into a rapid evolution. 15 minutes passed in what felt like moments, and then the transformation's final ripples faded away. Gasping softly, Nathan opened his eyes. Display! Without hesitation, he brought up the proficiency panel. A familiar pale blue interface shimmered into view, listing his newly enhanced stats and abilities. Chapter X, Uchiha Nathan, 12 years old, lay stretched out on the training ground, bathed in a soft, pulsating glow. As the lingering waves of chakra settled within him, his very essence seemed to realign and strengthen. A moment later, the familiar spiritual interface flickered into view before his inner eye, detailing his newly enhanced abilities. Physique, 1314, Spirit, 15, Chakra Reserves, 31,500, 42,644. Bloodline, Sharingan, 3 Magatama, 9,999, 10,000. Skills in progress. Chakra, Refining Technique, 5, 338, 554, 5,000. Wind Style, Windblade, 4, 1,660, 2,000. Shadow Clone Technique, Level 3, 340, 1,000. Chakra Absorption Technique, Level 5, 1,965, 2,750, 5,000. Rasengan, 1,710, 2,000. Palm Immortal Technique, 0, 8,000 and 20,000. Chakra Scalpel, 4, 772 and 20, 2,000. Heart Reflection Technique, Level 7, 4,885, 20,000. Sword Technique, Sword 6, 2,085, 5,850, 10,000. Phantom Sword Technique, Level 3, 250, 500, 15, 1,000. Instant Sword Technique, Level 1, 162, 200. Chakra Control 5, 1,965, 2,000, 1,450, par 5,000. 3 Body Technique, 3. Instant Body Technique, Level 4. Ninja Tool Throwing, Level 5. Fire Style, Phoenix Fire Technique, 5. Fire Style Great Fireball Technique, Fire Style Dragon Fire Technique, Level 5. Wind Style, Great Breakthrough. Magic, Shackle Technique. Illusion, Sharingan. Healing Technique, Level 5. Nathan's vision cleared further, and he felt a warm surge in every muscle and sinew. Not at all to his surprise, as his body transformed, his physique attribute quietly climbed from 13 to 14, another step forward on his path to mastery. Nathan's potential had surged again. His theoretical chakra limit jumped from 56,000 to 71,000 points, and his maximum daily chakra recovery climbed from 42,000 to 54,000, a net gain of 12,000 points. 2,000 of those points came from his strengthened physique, which let him endure greater strain and run the chakra refining technique for an extra hour. The other 10,000 points sprang from his body's naturally enhanced regenerative capacity. This progression made it clear, as Nathan's physical and spiritual attributes continue to advance, he's leaving behind the need to rely solely on actively performing the chakra refining technique for chakra restoration. He's now exhibiting the canny regenerative talent seen in prodigies like Naruto and Hashirama, able to replenish vast reserves of chakra every day with minimal meditation. Nathan would have abandoned the chakra refining technique long ago if it weren't for its unique ability to unlock his body's hidden potential and raise his chakra ceiling. The one saving grace is that, having brought the technique to level 5, He can now run it almost automatically, while walking, sitting, or even lying down, so it no longer monopolizes his time. Otherwise, he simply wouldn't have the hours to spare for such an intensive practice. Shifting his gaze away from the physique stat, Nathan scrolled down to his skill list. Nearly a month of relentless training had gone exclusively into strengthening his body, leaving him with no extra chakra to invest in other abilities. Unsurprisingly, apart from one exception, all his other skills showed virtually no growth. The sole outlier was the Palm Immortal technique. Driven by his physical regimen, he'd poured more than 8,000 proficiency points into it over the past weeks. Now, with just under 60% progress remaining, he was on the brink of reaching level 8. Thanks to the breakthrough, Nathan's chakra control proficiency jumped from level 4, 1,965 2,000 XP, straight up to level 5, 1,455,000 XP. At the same time, his chakra efficiency climbed from under 25% to 26.5%. From now on, every training session will cost the same amount of chakra, yet yield noticeably more skill experience. His swordsmanship saw a similar surge. After a month of constant skirmishes, he's pushed it to level 6, 5,850s per 10,000 XP, and sits just a few thousand points shy of level 7, likely the cap for his integrated sword style. Shifting his attention to raw attributes, Nathan noted his physique had risen to 14 and his spiritual aptitude to 15, nearly even and exactly where he'd hoped. He took a moment to survey his body and spirit. Everything felt in place. Now came the pivotal moment, awakening the Mangekyo Sharingan. The thought sent a thrill of anticipation coursing through him. Nathan had been on the road for almost a year and a half, and now at last he was ready to take the next crucial step. Chapter 251. Opening. Nathan closed the scroll's cover and steadied his breathing. He was ready to perform the reflection heart technique, shatter the last barrier within himself, and awaken the Mangekyo Sharingan. His memories from a previous life told him that nothing extraordinary would happen during the awakening, but caution never hurt anyone. Without a word to his comrades at the Odani village base, Nathan slipped away before dawn. He needed complete privacy for what came next. He ran along forest trails for over 10 miles, leaving the base's familiar rhythms and any prying eyes far behind. At last he came to Feishijin, a hidden mountain ravine hemmed in by jagged rock walls and whispering pines. A clear, cold stream rushed through the canyon floor, its water tumbling over smooth stones. No shinobi from Iwagakure, Konoha, or any other village ever ventured this deep into such rugged terrain. It offered nothing of value. The place was perfect. Nathan knelt beside the stream, its icy flow lapping at his fingertips. The steep cliffs on either side absorbed every sound, sealing him off from the outside world. Here, in this remote sanctuary, he would take the final step and unlock the power he had long sought. Nathan remembered this spot from the time he'd raided the Iwagakure Logistics Transit Base with his team. It was the perfect hiding place. Gathering chakra in his feet, he leapt off the rocky wall and sprinted deeper into the mountain stream. After a few moments, the soft rush of water reached him. He crept closer and found a narrow creek, its clear flow interrupted by oddly shaped stones that pinged ding-dong as the current struck them. The gentle melody soothed him, helping calm the rush of adrenaline still coursing through his veins after unlocking his Mangekyo Sharingan. Nathan skirted along the water's edge until he spotted a large boulder. With a flick of his hand, he unleashed a wind-style chakra blast, clearing away leaves and debris. Satisfied, he settled onto the rock in a cross-legged position. The short burst of movement had relieved much of his tension. He closed his eyes, drawing in steady breaths to center himself completely. Seconds stretched into minutes. Half an hour later, Nathan remained motionless, every nerve and muscle perfectly still as he waited for what came next. Nathan's breathing slowed until his mind was perfectly still and his body hummed with latent power. Then, in one swift motion, he snapped his eyes open. His hands moved with practiced precision, forming the complex seals of the reflection heart technique. Though he hadn't used it in some time, the technique was permanently etched into his muscle memory. In a flash, he had manifested the level 7 form of the art. A tingling chakra gathered in Nathan's brain and surged down through his optic nerves, flooding his vision in the same way it had when he first honed his Sharingan. Yet as the energy ebbed, he sensed nothing unusual, no shift in his eyes, no stirring of new power. His heart sank. If there were to be a final evolution of the Sharingan, surely this would have triggered it. Chakra trickled away, leaving Nathan staring at the stillness before him. Doubt crept in. Perhaps even the perfected reflection heart technique wasn't enough. He exhaled slowly, bracing himself for disappointment. Then, without warning, a pulse of warmth flickered at the edge of his sight. Nathan blinked, and the world seemed to shimmer. A soft resonance thrummed in his skull, as though the very barriers between thought and vision were dissolving. He felt his heart skip a beat. This was no ordinary sensation. Something inside him was awakening. When the last trace of special chakra poured into his eyes, it was as if a switch had flipped. Nathan's vision shattered and reformed, a powerful suction drawing every scrap of chakra from his body into his gaze. "Ugh!" he groaned, clamping his hands over his eyes as sharp pain lanced through his head. A bead of blood welled between his fingers and soon stained the back of his hand crimson. He bowed, as grateful he'd moved away from the Odani village base. If anyone had witnessed these violent chakra fluctuations, they'd never have let him be. Nathan had never expected unlocking his Mangekyo Sharingan to cause such a commotion. In his memories, Uchiha Itachi and Uchiha Sasuke had each awakened theirs with ease. Perhaps this was the price of defying fate itself. Nathan steadied his breathing. He reminded himself that, by all rights, his body shouldn't even be capable of opening the Mangekyo Sharingan. Without the advantage of his time travel, he likely wouldn't have awakened even a single Magatama Sharingan, let alone the fabled Mangekyo. By pursuing this path, Nathan was, in effect, defying fate itself, an act bound to produce unpredictable consequences. Thoughts raced through his mind as he gritted his teeth, enduring the searing pain and concentrating on the transformation unfolding in his Sharingan. At first, he felt nothing, but then a jolt of awareness hit him. His two eyes felt like bottomless abysses, ravenously consuming every last drop of chakra in his body. Yet he had no sense of where that energy was going. All he knew was that something far deeper, his very genes, or perhaps some more fundamental essence, was being rewritten. Those internal shifts forced his Sharingan to evolve, inching toward a higher-tier Mangekyo Sharingan. At the same time, his spiritual power surged violently, and the pressure on his flesh grew more intense than ever before. Nathan couldn't help but groan as fresh streams of blood welled from his eyes and splattered onto the floor. If not for the unmistakable sensation of his eyes transforming, he might have feared he was dying. Minutes ticked by, each one stretching into an eternity as Nathan remained locked in this agonizing crucible of power and pain. Nathan pressed his hands to the rough stone, gritting his teeth as a burning ache pulsed through his eyes and temples. 3 minutes, by ordinary reckoning, a mere breath, but to him it had stretched into an eternity. Sweat stung his brow, his vision blurred, and for a moment he feared he'd never escape the agony. Then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the pain subsided. He drew a shuddering breath, relief flooding through him. Shakily, Nathan climbed down from the boulder and hurried to the edge of the clear mountain stream. He crouched beside the water, heart still hammering, and forced himself to look into his own reflection. With a careful focus of will, he activated his newly awakened Sharingan. The water's surface rippled, revealing crimson eyes with 3 gleaming Magatama evenly spaced around a small, central pupil. He'd achieved the standard 3-tomo form, but this was only the first step. Nathan closed his eyes, concentrating on that seed of power inside him, willing it to grow. When he opened them again, he watched in astonishment as the 3 kamas elongated, their curved heads reaching toward the tiny black core. The dot swelled, soon filling nearly a third of each iris. Then each Megatama's tail split cleanly in 2, doubling the dark swirls until 6 graceful arcs radiated from the center, evenly spaced at 60-degree intervals. Nathan's breath caught. 6 Tomoe Sharingan, he'd done it. He blinked, and the world sharpened around him. Every ripple in the stream, every flutter of leaf and insect wing took on crystal clarity. His heart pounded with exhilaration. This new form was more than a cosmetic change. He could feel the surge of chakra, the heightened perceptual power thrumming behind his eyes. He raised a hand and gently touched his left eye, marveling at the smooth, warm surface. A grin broke across his face as he flexed his fingers, eager to test his limits. Ahead lay challenges he'd scarcely dared to imagine before, but now he felt ready. The path to the Mangekyo Sharingan waited, and with 6 Tomoe as his foundation, Nathan knew he was one step closer to unlocking the next secret of his power. Nathan stared into a nearby reflection and saw it at once. His Sharingan had transformed into a simple black cess, its pattern whispering of unfathomable power. There was no mistaking it. He had awakened the Mangekyo Sharingan. A torrent of energy surged through his mind, making it feel as though a single thought could unleash limitless force. Nathan recognized this sensation partly as an illusion born of his newly amplified mental chakra, but the reality was clear. He was stronger than ever before. His mastery of genjutsu had leaped forward, his perceptual and illusionary abilities rising several levels in an instant. And with the Mangekyo Sharingan now open, he knew 2 unique ocular techniques awaited him. Chapter 252. The Mangekyo Sharingan, often called the Eye of the Soul, draws its power directly from the wielder's memories and deepest desires. Ever since Nathan first sensed the stirrings of this dojutsu, he had wondered which formidable ability he would unlock. Now, he was about to find out. He steadied his breath and reached inward, seeking the chakra that pulsed behind his eyes. At first, nothing stirred. No uncanny space-time distortions, no mind-bending illusions. Then, another presence made itself known, a raw, violent force simmering in the marrow of his bones. Trusting that instinct, Nathan willed the power to rise. An instant later, a white-hot pain lanced through him, as if invisible hands had seized every cell in his body. He groaned, his face twisting in agony. Then, like molten silver taking shape around a core of dark fire, a massive arm appeared, its ribs arching overhead to form a protective shell. A second, then a third limb emerged, constructing a skeletal armor of eerie brilliance. Nathan had manifested Susanoo, the ultimate defense of the Mangekyo Sharingan, born from the transformation of pure mental energy. Legends spoke of Susanoo unfolding in 4 distinct stages, each more complete and powerful than the last. As the spirit warrior coalesced around him, Nathan knew he stood on the threshold of a new realm of power, and nothing would be the same again. Chapter Hex, the 4 forms of Susanoo. Nathan stood alone in the moonlit clearing, his heart pounding as he activated the Mangekyo Sharingan. In an instant, a surge of chakra erupted around him, coalescing into the first stage of his Susanoo. Stage 1. The Skeletal Warrior. At its most basic, Susanoo appears as a glowing, skeletal figure. Azure Chakra outlines each bone, granting it decent defense against ordinary attacks, but it remains vulnerable to fierce blows. In this form, Susanoo can grip simple weapons like standard swords, though its assault is limited to straightforward physical strikes. Determined to gain more power, Nathan poured additional chakra into his manifestation. The skeletal frame began to shift. Stage 2. The Flesh-Bound Guardian. Muscle and sinew wove themselves around the bare bones, and a hardened layer of chakra fused over the surface like an armored coat. This second stage achieves the best balance between offense and defense. From its palm, the Susanoo can now launch Yasaka Magatama, mystical, comma-shaped orbs of energy that scorch targets from a distance. Nathan felt the raw potential of this form, able to strike with both might and precision. But he needed greater protection. Summoning every ounce of his will, he drove chakra through his eyes again, advancing to the 3rd stage. Stage 3. Karasu Tengu Armor. A menacing breastplate and helmet, styled after the legendary Karasu Tengu, snapped into place. The new armor plates covered vital joints and riveted across the chest, granting Susanoo near impenetrable defense. Any attack that once staggered, it now glanced harmlessly off. Yet this strength came at a steep price. Chakra consumption skyrocketed, pushing even Nathan's Mangekyo Sharingan to its limits. He could feel his reserves draining. He could not hold this form indefinitely. Knowing the battle demanded everything he had, Nathan made a final, desperate commitment. Stage 4. The Complete Colossus. With a thunderous roar of chakra, the Susanoo expanded. Legs and a massive lower body erupted from the torso, transforming it into a towering behemoth. The spirit soul that Nathan controlled now centered at the crown of the giant's head, granting perfect coordination and focus. In this ultimate stage, Susanoo shed all defensive weaknesses and gained breathtaking agility. Every step shook the ground. Every swing of its colossal blade cleaved the air like a meteor's descent. Nathan's breath came in ragged gasps, but he smiled behind his mask of power. With the complete Susanoo at his command, he felt unstoppable. The final phase of the battle was about to begin. Above, we outlined Susanoo's 4 developmental stages, each unlocking greater power as the user's ocular strength grows. What Nathan has summoned now is only the very first, or initial form, which exists outside of those 4 stages. In this rudimentary state, he can manifest only the ethereal arms and ribcage, leaving massive gaps that expose his body. Those openings make it all too easy for an opponent to strike, so its practical value is only average. Beyond this preliminary shape, Susanoo can evolve into its complete or true form. In that ultimate state, the guardian spirit swells to titanic proportions, its chakra rock solid. It can cleave mountains in half, shatter meteorites with a swing, and even take to the air. Moreover, it can weave powerful chakra seals that supercharge the user's signature techniques, rendering the combination almost invincible. But there's a catch. Summoning true Susanoo requires exhausting the full might of the Mangekyo Sharingan and drawing on an enormous chakra reserve, conditions Nathan simply doesn't meet. In fact, he can barely sustain this unsteady initial form for more than a moment. There are 2 reasons for that. Susanoo's aura pressed in on him like a steel trap. Nathan could feel every inch of its weight shredding at his stamina, and that was only the physical strain. Channeling this much power also battered his Mangekyo Sharingan. It wasn't as devastating as unleashing a full-blown eye technique, but it was still no small risk. He forced himself to pull back. The silver-white arms and rib-like plating that had sprouted across his torso drew in, folding against his skin. For a moment, Nathan stood perfectly still, allowing himself to sense the leftover energy lingering in his eyes. A fierce warmth blossomed in his left eye, and he winced as a single tear of blood traced down his cheek. Suddenly, an invisible force folded around him. The air rippled, and then he was gone. 1, 2, 3. Time stretched on, each second crawling past until finally, on the 10th beat, Nathan reappeared in the exact same spot. The supernatural glow had vanished. Only the faintest echo of power hummed beneath his skin. He dropped to one knee, breath coming in ragged gasps, but his eyes were wide with exhilaration. He'd held Susanoo. He'd pushed it to its limits and come out the other side. Staring at his trembling hands, Nathan felt a surge of triumph. In that moment, 2 words blazed through his mind: invincible. Nathan's left-eye pupil technique is known as Heaven's Guard. Its name differs by only a single word from Kaguya Otsutsuki's space-shifting Samsara Eye ability, Heaven's Relocation, but the resemblance ends there. In fact, Nathan's Heaven's Guard is in many ways even more formidable than Kaguya's. Heaven's Guard grants Nathan 2 devastating powers. First, it severs his presence from the material world, what sages call emerging beyond the 3 realms and transcending the 5 elements. In this state, he becomes completely untouchable. No ninjutsu, taijutsu, or genjutsu can harm him, and no one can perceive or locate him. An enemy might stand within arm's reach and still be oblivious to Nathan's existence, as though they occupy 2 entirely separate planes of reality. That alone would make Heaven's Guard a terrifying ability, but its second effect is what truly marks it as apocalyptic. Upon activation, the technique instantly purges every negative condition from Nathan's body. Poisons, paralysis, fatigue, even chronic injuries vanish in an instant. All debilitating statuses are stripped away, leaving him in perfect health and prime fighting form. This cleansing boon, combined with his unassailable, out-of-phase state, makes Heaven's Guard one of the most fearsome pupil techniques ever conceived. In other words, even if Koto Amatsukami, the strongest illusion, were to invade his mind and secretly rewrite his will, a single activation of Heaven's glory would snap him right back to normal. The same holds true for every other calamity. Lost limbs, deadly poisons, crippling curses, all are undone by Teeling. His technique's built-in reset. So long as he retains the faintest breath and enough consciousness, true death is impossible. Of course, this relies on having sufficient chakra to fuel the miracle. Without the energy, Heaven's glory remains latent. This is precisely why Nathan regards his ability as invincible. And why did he awaken it in the first place? He believes it sprang from the constant threat of the Third Great Ninja War. Thrown into that brutal conflict with only ordinary strength, he spent day after day haunted by the fear of death. Over time, that fear crystallized into a singular obsession: absolute invulnerability. Beyond mere survival, he even began to dream of transcending the limits of this world itself. It also demands extraordinary strength. Given that power combined with his other abilities, it's no surprise that Nathan managed to awaken this technique. Unfortunately, he can sustain the Heavenly Guard for only 10 seconds. Pushing beyond that limit places a tremendous strain on his Sharingan, dramatically speeding up the onset of blindness. So even with this eye technique, Nathan is far from invincible. He still must exercise caution whenever the situation calls for it. Chapter 253, Mastery of the Self. Nathan focused inward, wiping the remaining blood from beneath his left eye. He settled his breathing, reached deep into his awareness, and probed the power of his right eye. Minutes ticked by in tense silence. Then, without any visible sign on his body, he felt a subtle shift in his chakra, proof that the new ocular technique was at last awake. Like its counterpart in his left eye, this new ability was non-violent in nature. Nathan had named it human control. It granted him dominion over every aspect of his own being: organs, tissues, cells, even consciousness itself. Anything that belonged to self could be manipulated by this technique. Of course, Nathan's skill was still in its infancy. For now, he could only control functions at the organ level, speeding up his heartbeat, heightening his digestive efficiency, or triggering a surge of adrenaline in his bloodstream. But even these modest feats marked a tremendous breakthrough. With practice, he knew he would refine his touch and unlock the full potential of human control. From what we've seen so far, if Heaven's control is the most formidable ocular technique, then human's control must be its polar opposite, the weakest. Of course, that's only at this early stage. Although human's control currently ranks lowest in power and precision, its untapped potential is enormous. Right now, Nathan can't yet fine-tune every nuance of his body perfectly, and his command isn't as flexible as he'd like. But as he grows stronger, his mastery over human's control will sharpen. He'll be able to command each muscle to its fullest, override the body's natural chakra limit, and rapidly adapt to any hostile environment. In essence, he'll trigger a form of self-directed evolution that's both autonomous and under his complete control. If Nathan ever feared that his Mangekyo Sharingan might never evolve into the eternal Mangekyo Sharingan, he need not worry any longer. With human's control advancing alongside him, the path to eternal evolution lies wide open. Nathan's transplantation of his brother's eyes and his subsequent awakening of the eternal Mangekyo Sharingan effectively corrected the genetic flaws that had once limited him. Though he had no living siblings, his mastery of the human defense technique, paired with the guiding insight of the heart's reflection, had steered his body through a precise program of evolution and mutation, completing the missing pieces of his ocular lineage. In short, nothing now stood between Nathan and the true power of the eternal Mangekyo Sharingan. Even better, human defense did more than just accelerate his physical development. It offered a way to counteract the blindness that normally comes with overusing the Mangekyo Sharingan. The technique itself carried a risk of temporary vision loss, but by carefully controlling its activation rhythm, Nathan could push back that onset of blindness by a remarkable margin. With his body's newfound resilience, unassisted by any Hashirama cells, his Mangekyo Sharingan would no longer burn out after only a few uses. Instead, he could sustain his peak combat power indefinitely, forging a fearsome advantage that few shinobi could ever hope to match. As long as his Sharingan evolves to the level of the eternal Mangekyo during this period, he needn't worry about any lingering side effects. In fact, human control may prove just as crucial to his future as the life-saving Heaven control. After spending a few moments fully absorbing the new ability's power, Nathan deactivated his Mangekyo Sharingan. Then he reopened his proficiency panel, and the familiar pale blue interface flickered back to life. Nathan Uchiha, age 12. Physique 14, Spirit 9 up from 15, Chakra 12,500, 42,644 effective, Bloodline, Sharingan, 3 Tomoe, 9,999 10,000, Mangekyo 150,000. Skills and proficiencies, Chakra Refining Technique. Level 5, 554 5,000, Wind Style Windblade. Level 4, 1,660, 2,000. Shadow Clone Technique, Level 3, 3's 40,000. Chakra Absorption Technique, Level 5, 2,7, 55,000. Rasengan Level 4, 1,710, 2,000. Palm Immortal Technique, Level 7, 8,200,000. Chakra Scalpel, Level 4, 922,000. Heart Reflection Technique, Level 7, 4,886, 20,000. Swordsmanship Level 6, 5,850, 10,000. Phantom Swordsmanship Level 3, 15 to 1,000. Instant Swordsmanship 1, 162 toy 200. Chakra Control Level 5, 1,455,000. Perfect Skills. The most dramatic change was Nathan's spirit attribute, which leapt from 15 to 19 the moment his Sharingan evolved from the 3 Tomoe form into the Mangekyo. Considering his already formidable baseline, this 4-point surge represents an increase of roughly 80% in his mental power. Astonished by the magnitude of his own growth, Nathan realized he was now operating on an entirely new level of perception and control. Nathan knew his physique had always trailed behind his spiritual power, and now he reckoned his spirit was at least twice as strong as his body, a dangerous tipping point. Once that 2-to-1 ratio was breached, the balance would collapse, and trouble would follow. Feeling the weight of his spirit pressing down on his flesh, he was grateful he hadn't hurried to unlock the Mangekyo Sharingan earlier. If he had, his physique would have stayed at only 11 points, 8 fewer than his current 19-point spiritual attribute. With such a gap, the risks would have been enormous. Fortunately, he'd emerged unscathed from the lightning strike. But Nathan knew he couldn't rest. He needed to build up his body as quickly as possible to restore harmony between spirit and flesh. Only by equalizing those two forces could he prevent catastrophic imbalance, and perhaps even tap into greater hidden potential. Nathan frowned as he studied his updated attributes. Despite his low physique holding him back, his spiritual stat had climbed by 4 points, yet his theoretical chakra ceiling had only risen from 71,000 to 120,000. Impressive on paper, but he couldn't shake the feeling that the gain was smaller than he'd hoped. His chakra regeneration hadn't kept pace either. Whereas he used to recover 54,000 chakra points daily, that figure now sat at 85,000, an increase of just over 30,000. True, he could replenish nearly twice the amount he currently carried, but it still felt underwhelming next to the 4-point spiritual boost. On the plus side, none of that latent power would go to waste. Any unused reserves were safely stored in his body, ready for future use. Nathan allowed himself a brief nod of satisfaction before shifting his gaze. On the same interface, his bloodline ability section glowed with a new symbol. Just as he'd suspected, his Sharingan had advanced from the standard 3 Tomoe pattern to the legendary Mangekyo level. Only one thing dampened his excitement. The progress bar beside Mangekyo Sharingan read a disheartening 150,000. Nathan rubbed his temples. Mastering this power would be a long, arduous journey, but he was determined to see it through. Nathan wasted no time activating the Level 7 Reflection Heart technique to test its impact on his Mangekyo Sharingan's evolution. In the past, each application of this technique had reliably pushed his 3 Magatama Sharingan forward. This time, however, the first attempt brought no visible change to the Mangekyo. Undeterred, he tried again. Still nothing, although he could feel the technique's energy pressing against the eye's barrier. Only on the third casting did the progress bar behind his Mangekyo Sharingan tick upward, and even then, only by a sliver. In other words, it took 3 uses of Reflection Heart to yield the same small gain one application used to grant. Factor in the fact that the Mangekyo's progress bar is 5 times longer, and Nathan realized he faced nearly 15 times the effort required to evolve his 3 Magatama Sharingan into its current form. The enormity of that gap nearly made him stagger. After a moment's breathless shock, Nathan drew himself together. He still had work to do. Nathan had already come a long way. His chakra now regenerated at an astonishing rate, and with his total reserves growing every day, he no longer had to worry about running low. On top of that, his mastery of the reflection heart technique was nearly 1/4 of the way to level 7. He'd reach level 8 soon enough. That upgrade would strengthen his Mangekyo Sharingan considerably, making the final proficiency hurdles far less intimidating. Best of all, unlocking the Mangekyo Sharingan granted him the power to dominate the tailed beasts. Once he bound one of them as his personal chakra battery, even challenges 15 times more difficult would be well within his reach. Chapter 254, Distribution. Nathan finished securing the harvest and wasted no time covering his tracks. Climbing to the roof of the Feishijian, he activated his Sharingan and scanned the area. Once he was sure no one had noticed his movements, he slipped back to the Odani village base. Under the pale moonlight, Nathan moved like a ghost, effortlessly evading the outer rock ninja sentries and the Konoha patrols inside. He reached his simple wooden quarters without so much as a whisper. A quick wash later, he shed his gear and collapsed onto the bed. Before his head even touched the pillow, soft snores told him he had already drifted off. The last month had been brutal. Between grueling training sessions and non-stop missions, he'd hardly slept. But now, with his Mangekyo Sharingan unlocked and his power rivaling that of a Kage, he finally felt secure enough to rest. Over the next 3 days, Nathan set aside formal training to recuperate, though he wasn't completely idle. Nathan had only just awakened his Mangekyo Sharingan, and like any newly born dojutsu, it needed time to settle. He took the opportunity to probe its changes. Beyond the general boost, each eye granted a 4-point increase in his spiritual attribute, enough to supercharge his genjutsu. Now facing a seasoned shinobi like Mensho, Nathan felt a surge of confidence. Even with just his 3-tomo Sharingan, he could trap an enemy in an instantaneous illusion Sharingan, holding them long enough to prevent any escape. But by adding the Mangekyo Sharingan into the mix, he knew that unless his opponent anticipated the move, there would be virtually no chance of breaking free. In short, Nathan had just acquired a hidden trump card. His adversaries had thoroughly studied his limits, every jutsu, every tactic. They believed they understood the full extent of his Sharingan's power. What they didn't know was that he'd unlocked a brand new ability, the Mangekyo. They wouldn't see it coming, and that was before even unleashing the divine might of Susanoo. Nathan didn't underestimate the base form's offense or defense, and if that proved insufficient, he still had a trump card, the Heaven's Guardian technique. 10 seconds under its protection was more than enough to turn the tide of any fight. At this point, no Jonin could legitimately challenge him. Still, both of his ocular jutsus were more strategic than outright offensive, so he needed to bolster his fundamental combat abilities. With that in mind, Nathan began redistributing his chakra. After his recent breakthroughs, he could now recover 85,000 chakra points each day. He decided to allocate 36,000 of those points to physical enhancement through the Palm Fairy technique. Since each activation consumed roughly 150 chakra points, he could perform the technique 240 times. At a rhythm of 1 activation every 3 minutes, his training would stretch across about 12 hours. Beyond that, Nathan earmarked another 30,000 chakra points to tap deeper into his Mangekyo Sharingan's potential, accelerating the development of both heavenly control and human control and strengthening his Susanoo. To accomplish this, he would employ the reflection of the heart technique, diving straight into the core of his own chakra network. With his plan set, Nathan braced himself for the grueling hours of refinement ahead, confident that each moment of disciplined training would edge him closer to unrivaled power. Nathan's chakra control has reached level 5, 1,455,000, granting him a 26.5% reduction in chakra expenditure. At this rate, each session of the reflection of the heart technique costs him roughly 150 to 160 chakra points. To rack up 30,000 points, he must repeat the exercise 192 times, a solid 3 hours of continuous practice. Add that to the 12 hours he already spends daily on the Palm Immortal technique, and he's looking at a 15-hour training regimen every single day. Clearly, chakra isn't the bottleneck anymore. Nathan's supply keeps rising faster than he can burn it. His real hurdle is time. Neither the Palm Immortal technique, which fortifies his body, nor the reflection of the heart technique, which unlocks his latent potential, can be delegated to a shadow clone. He can't lighten his workload by splitting himself. His only saving grace is that lesser skills, those that don't require direct benefit to his main body, can be leveled up via shadow clones and then transferred back, converting their experience into his own proficiency. It costs extra chakra and isn't the most efficient method, but with time so scarce, it's the best option he has. Nathan decided to have his shadow clone absorb the remaining 19,000 chakra units. With that settled, he turned his attention to which techniques deserved his focus. His pupillary technique lacked real offensive power, so he narrowed his options to two essentials: Wind Release, Windblade, and the Rasengan. Windblade was already a solid wind-style ninjutsu with room for growth, while Rasengan was the foundation for his future S-rank forbidden art, Wind Release, Rasen Shuriken. Other jutsus would have to wait until he had extra chakra to spare. Once his clone was busy digesting chakra, Nathan dove into training. This time, he didn't simply repeat the same motions over and over. Whether he was strengthening his body with the Palm Immortal technique or accelerating the evolution of his Mangekyo Sharingan with the Mirror Heart technique, he forced himself to open his Mangekyo about once every 10 cycles. Each time his eyes sparked into the awakened state, he applied his human puppet technique internally, guiding minute adjustments in muscle fiber, joint alignment, and chakra pathways. Bit by bit, his physique, his dojutsu, and his elemental mastery all edged closer to their next breakthroughs. Nathan still couldn't channel enough power through his pupil to attempt any deep, refined manipulations. Yet the human control technique answered his conscious will, quietly restructuring his body even when no visible changes appeared. To make steady progress, he needed to weave in short bursts of human control throughout his regimen, never long enough to overstrain his right eye. Only by carefully balancing duration and frequency could he push his constitution attribute upward without inviting serious injury. After nearly a full day of experimentation, Nathan arrived at a clear timeline. Raising his constitution from 14 to 15 points would take about 20 days of disciplined practice. At that pace, he'd lay the foundation for his next transformation, roughly 1/3 faster than his previous leap from 13 to 14 points. Logically, raising his physique from 14 to 15 points should have been tougher and more time-consuming than the jump from 13 to 14. Yet Nathan managed it in even less time than before. There was only one explanation: the guiding influence of his human control ability, which steered him clear of countless mistakes and detours. As his mastery of human control continued to sharpen, its effects only grew stronger, and even more time was saved. It wasn't hard to imagine that the leap from 15 to 16 points might take him less time than this one had. With thoughts racing through his mind, Nathan forcefully expelled every distraction and refocused on his practice. Day after day, he persisted in the same steady routine, each moment carrying him just a little further along the path of his improvement. Chapter 255, On the Brink of Collapse. Swish, swish, swish. Dozens of shuriken hurtled toward him. Nathan froze for a heartbeat as the three Magatama in his eyes spun to life, locking onto each blade's flight path. In the next instant, he shifted his weight, weaving between attacks and deflecting others with precise wrist flicks. Not one projectile found its mark. Before he could exhale, a fresh barrage of kunai screamed through the air. Thanks to his Sharingan, Nathan spotted the telltale blinking of explosive tags bound to their shafts. Instinct took over. He darted aside, arms raised, body coiling away from danger. Boom, boom. A series of violent detonations erupted in rapid succession. Fiery blasts roared outward, compressing the air into brutal shockwaves that whipped Nathan's hair into a frenzy. He staggered backward, shielding his face as the ground trembled beneath his feet. Just when the dust began to settle, a sharp, staccato whistle cut through the chaos, then another, and another. On the orders he recognized all too well, the rock ninjas who had pressed the assault suddenly abandoned their positions. Like shadows slipping away at dawn, they melted from the front lines, leaving only swirling embers and scorched earth behind. Nathan stood alone amid the ruin, muscles taut and senses alight. The battlefield lay quiet for the moment, but he knew it was only the calm before the next storm. 2 weeks had now passed since Nathan first awakened his Mangekyo Sharingan, and 12 days since he began its rigorous training. On the second day of that training, the Hidden Rock Village struck Odani Village once more. Having learned of Nathan's presence, they sent their top shinobi to hunt him down. Wary of revealing his true power, Nathan held back, and soon found himself overmatched. Meanwhile, the Konoha defenders in the Odani stronghold fought with everything they had. They lost nearly a third of their forces before finally driving off the rock ninjas. Over the next 10 days, wave after wave of enemy attacks hammered the village. Even after Fenglu Town dispatched 2 reinforcement convoys, fewer than 150 Konoha shinobi remained, bloodied, exhaust teetering on the brink of collapse. One misstep now would spell total disaster. Elsewhere around Fenglu Town, Konoha outposts stood in the same dire peril. Omura Yuito's plan has shown some success, but only to a point. By deploying independent garrisons of high-ranking jonin like Nathan, the Konoha forces have managed to plug some of their defense's weakest gaps. Their presence has slowed the rock shinobi advance, pinning the enemy before the outer strongholds and preventing any real threat to Fenglu Town, for now. Yet this fragile stalemate comes at a steep price. Because jonin such as Nathan must hold the front lines almost single-handedly, the fighting at the mid and lower levels has grown brutally intense. Casualties among the rank-and-file defenders are mounting with each skirmish. Yes, the rock shinobi are taking losses of their own, but they can easily replace fallen troops from their vast reserves, while Konoha's numbers continue to dwindle. In the end, Omura Yuito's strategy can delay the enemy, but it can't stop them forever. According to current assessments, the strongholds will likely hold out in the short term, but unless they find reinforcements or a new tactic soon, it's only a matter of time before they fall. Once the outer outposts fell, it was only a matter of time before the central stronghold at Fenglu Town collapsed. Nathan couldn't shake his unease. What exactly were Omura Yuito and High Command planning? Shaking off his doubts, he headed back toward the Xiaogu village outpost. There, scores of wounded shinobi lay scattered across the yard. Instantly, Nathan shifted into medical ninjutsu, hands weaving chakra-infused seals as he assessed each injury. Fortunately, most wounds were superficial, cuts and bruises from shuriken and kunai. Thanks to his level 7 palm immortal technique and level 4 chakra scalpel, he cleansed and sutured this with ease. After an hour of intense work alongside several fellow medics, every patient was stabilized. Before departing, Nathan warned the squad leaders to remain on high alert, then returned to his quarters. His mind churned. Perhaps it was the power surge from activating his Mangekyo Sharingan, or maybe he'd always foreseen this war's trajectory. From the steady collapse of the outposts to the inevitable fall of Fenglu Town, the outcome felt preordained. Facing the rock ninja's relentless assault held little appeal. His decision was made. Nathan felt more like an observer than a participant, as if he were merely acting out a part written for him. He felt little for the deaths of his subordinates or the greater course of the war. Ever since he had activated his Mangekyo Sharingan and gained that formidable shield of self-preservation, he'd slipped into a state of near-complete detachment. He didn't know whether this change was a blessing or a curse, and he didn't particularly care to find out. All he wanted now was to train relentlessly, to grow stronger, and then, finally, do as he pleased. Perhaps there was a kind of purity in such single-mindedness. Morning arrived in a blur. After only a few hours' rest, the rock ninja were already eager to renew their assault. Word circulated that the enemy intended to crush their defenses in one final onslaught. Nathan climbed to the roof of a nearby outbuilding for a better vantage point. Below him stood 300 rock ninja, their stony expressions betraying a fierce determination. Behind him, fewer than 150 allied shinobi shifted warily, exhaustion etched into every stance. Nathan surveyed the scene and felt the weight of the moment. If he didn't unleash everything he had now, this stronghold, his comrades' last refuge, would surely fall. With a steadying breath, he summoned every ounce of resolve. The time to hesitate was over. Nathan hesitated for a moment, weighing whether to unleash more of his power, when 4 Iwagakure Jonin broke from their formation and charged straight at him. His jaw tightened. Over the past 10 days of this war, he'd grown tired of their hit-and-run tactics. Every time he broke through their lines and cut down an opponent, they merely replaced their losses, doggedly trailing him to pull him away from the larger battles. They were like vultures, determined to pin him down. The more enemies he killed, the harder they fought back. Their single goal was to stop him from reinforcing other fronts. It was maddening and deeply frustrating. Nathan spared a glance for the resolute Konoha shinobi standing beside him, then back to the 4 jonin racing across the rooftops below. He drew a slow breath, forcing a wry smile. "Fine," he murmured under his breath. "I'll let you live, for now." With that, he pressed the balls of his feet against the tarred ridge of the roof and channeled chakra into his legs. In an instant, he vanished from sight. Moments later, Nathan reappeared directly in front of the 4 jonin. They spun on their heels and flung themselves into battle stances, weapons already at the ready, just in time to meet him head-on. Nathan's eyes flashed as he took in all 4 opponents at once, instinctively predicting their next moves. In a heartbeat, he twisted his body, narrowly evading 2 incoming strikes. With a swift swish, he drew the short sword at his waist. Metal rang out twice as he met the kunai hurled by the other 2 Iwagakure jonin, deflecting them with perfect timing. In that instant, the chaos of the battlefield seemed to slow, each heartbeat stretching into eternity in Nathan's vision. Seizing the moment, he raised his free left hand and formed a hand seal with unprecedented speed, then unleashed his ninjutsu, wind style, great breakthrough. He felt his chest expand, drew in a deep breath, and exhaled with explosive force. Chapter 256, Opportunity. The 4 Iwagakure jonin froze as Nathan finished the hand seal. Their eyes widened in alarm. They knew they had to act, yet before they could counter, he spoke. Wind style, great breakthrough. In an instant, the sky darkened, and a powerful gust of wind blasted from Nathan's mouth. Within seconds, it swelled into a ferocious tornado. The swirling vortex wove effortlessly through the gaps between the jonin and tore straight into the ranks of the 300 Iwagakure foot soldiers behind them. From the start, Nathan's true target had been those foot soldiers. By closing the distance, he eliminated any chance the jonin had to disrupt his jutsu. Yes, he'd exposed his one-handed sealing ability, but the payoff was worth it. Caught entirely off guard, the Iwagakure shinobi had no time to mount a defense. They could only scatter and dodge as the tornado ripped through their formation. In moments, their ranks were in chaos, a perfect collapse of unity. That was precisely Nathan's aim. When you're outnumbered, sowing disorder can be the greatest advantage of all. Nathan weighed his options. Victory would come only one of 2 ways: bolster his own forces or sap the enemy's strength. He couldn't power up the Konoha ninjas further, at least not yet, so he had to weaken their opponents. Gathering his chakra, he unleashed his signature technique, wind style, great breakthrough. A howling gale ripped through the rock ninja formation, scattering them apart and leaving them disorganized. At his signal, the Konoha shinobi surged forward, seizing the advantage Nathan had carved out for them. As the enemy line split, Nathan offered a curt nod of satisfaction. He raised his short sword just in time to meet the 4 rock ninjas who were already converging on him again. Clang! 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 The clash of metal rang out with every stroke. Alone against 4, Nathan never faltered. If anything, he held them at bay. Beads of cold sweat rolled down the foreheads of his opponents as they realized something crucial. Nathan wasn't fighting at his usual pace. Today, he was something else entirely. Nathan's strength felt immeasurably greater than before. At first, the 4 Iwagakure shinobi assumed it was a trick of the light or a brief surge of power, a temporary burst that would fade. But as the fight dragged on, they realized this was no illusion. Nathan really had grown. Had he been holding back in previous battles? Their eyes met in tense glances, each man reading the doubt and fear mirrored in his comrades' faces. They had lost too many allies trying to pin Nathan down. If this was only the tip of his true ability, what else might he unleash? Their hands faltered. Sword strikes and kunai tosses fell short of their former ferocity. Gradually, they shifted into defense, bracing for something they could neither predict nor withstand. Nathan's Sharingan flickered as he watched them. He saw the hesitation in their grips, the quick glances, the tightening of muscles as they steeled themselves against an unknown threat. Piecing it all together, a slow, confident smile curved his lips. Now was his moment. Opportunity awaited. Nathan seized the moment. In a heartbeat, he wove together a fresh plan and shifted the tempo of his attacks. Facing him were 4 Iwakure Shinobi, 1 true Jonin and 3 special Jonin. Under the weight of their combined pressure, Nathan's eyes flicked to a critical flaw in their formation. With a sharp clang, he unleashed a trio of sword strikes. His first 2 blades deflected a pair of incoming kunai. The third shove sent another rock Jonin stumbling backward. In the same breath, Nathan sidestepped and lunged at the 4th opponent. His short sword sliced forward in a deadly arc. Shimazu Shinya sensed the danger and leapt back instinctively, just avoiding the blade's tip. His retreat saved him, but it freed the rock Jonin, whom Nathan had pushed aside. Nathan allowed himself a brief triumphant smirk, just as he'd predicted. He drove off the ground with both legs, propelling himself forward in a burst of speed. At the same time, he adjusted his dagger's angle and fixed its point on the remaining Iwagakure ninja. Nathan's seamless shifts in focus gave him away. Shimazu Shinya had never been his true quarry. Every feint and withdrawal was meant to herd Shinya aside. Clearing the way to the Iwagakure Shinobi, Nathan had maneuvered into a corner. After their prolonged clash, he'd studied the habits of all 4 opponents. Now, with the uncanny vision of his Mangekyo Sharingan, already at the 3 Magatama stage, he'd methodically tightened the noose, waiting for the perfect opening. In an instant, a dagger shimmered at the edge of Kawachi Guima's vision, its point trained on his neck. Guima froze, heart-pounding, then stumbled backward, too slow to erase his momentary lapse. Under ordinary circumstances, such a fleeting hesitation might go unnoticed. But Nathan's heightened Sharingan dissected the flaw in a heartbeat, and he struck with deadly precision. Nathan sprang his illusion sword technique into action. Kawachi Guima, already on the back foot, suddenly froze as the subtle mirage clouded his vision, and in that heartbeat of hesitation, a weakness in his guard was laid bare. A single falter can set off a cascade of mistakes. What had been only a minor flaw now yawned wide under the spell's influence. "Guima, watch out!" the Jonin Kanhara Nobunaga shouted, drawing and tossing a kunai to interrupt Nathan's follow-through. But Nathan had anticipated interference. He swept his short sword in a swift arc, the blade slamming into the kunai's shaft with a sharp clang and sending it skittering off course. Relief flooded Nobunaga's face. His young shinobi was unscathed, and Guima's life seemed secured, or so he thought. In that instant of complacency, Nathan's eyes gleamed with mocking intent. With a fluid step forward, he tilted his head just enough to evade the returning kunai and closed the distance once more, ready to press his advantage. Nathan thrust out his left palm and pressed it against Kawachi Guima's chest. Kawachi's eyes widened in shock as a dense pale blue sphere of chakra, spinning with raw power, seized him. A spray of blood burst from Kawachi's lips, and he was flung backward, crashing against the jagged rocks. The short sword strike had only been a diversion. Nathan's true weapon was the Rasengan, a seal-less spiraling ball of chakra. After more than 10 days of relentless training, he'd elevated his Rasengan from level 4, 1710-2000, to level 5, 9-5-5000. This leap in proficiency let him unleash the technique with blinding speed and near-perfect concealment. In a single instant, he'd incapacitated a veteran shinobi from the Rock Village. Today's recommendation: 5 updates. Chapter 257, Part 2, Kimura? Damn it! Kamihara Nobunaga swore under his breath as he watched Kawachi Kimura spit blood and sail backwards from the force of Nathan's strike. Immediately, he drew a kunai and lunged at Nathan's flank. Shimazu Shinya, who had just sidestepped to avoid the attack, realized too late that he'd underestimated Nathan. Determined to make up for his mistake, Shinya darted forward, but Nathan had already ripped a hole in their encirclement. There was no way they could close ranks again in time. Focusing his chakra, Nathan activated the illusion sword technique. In a blur of motion, he closed the distance to the closest opponent, Shimazu Shinya. Shinya's eyes went wide as Nathan's dagger flashed toward him, and his defense faltered. Sensing the opening, Nathan cocked his fist for a decisive blow, when suddenly, Another Iwagakure ninja, who had been held back by Nathan only moments before, sprang in to shield Shinya. Clang! The ninja's kunai slammed against Nathan's dagger in a bright burst of metal on metal. The two weapons ground against each other in a shower of sparks as their wielders strained for advantage. Then, in one fluid motion, Nathan dropped his right elbow, shot his left hand straight up, and planted his palm firmly before his chest, ready for whatever move his opponents threw at him next. Nathan's familiar gesture froze both the Iwagakure Jonin before him and Shimazu Shinya, now fully alert behind. They couldn't forget how, mere moments ago, Nathan had formed a single-handed seal to unleash his wind escape jutsu. At that speed, once he began the seal, evasion would be impossible. Instantly, they dove apart, clearing the center. A low, teasing chuckle slipped from Nathan's lips as he watched them scramble. Then he pivoted, facing the charging Kanhara Nobunaga head-on. Nobunaga skidded to a hesitant halt, surprise flashing in his eyes as he subconsciously slowed. Seizing the opening, Nathan flashed the hand seal with his left, parted his lips, and expelled a blazing orb no larger than a balsam seed. The sphere flickered like a living ember, then multiplied, fiery sprites swirling around him in a fluid, predatory dance. Without pause, Nobunaga bounded backward, landing clear of the first wave. But the fireballs pursued with relentless precision, darting through the air like living shards of flame. His face set in grim concentration, Nobunaga continued his retreat, fingers weaving new seals as he fought to keep distance from the infernal huntresses. At the critical moment, Kanhara Nobunaga finished the last of his hand seals and unleashed his ninjutsu, water-style, water array wall. A towering wall of water surged up in front of him, colliding with the incoming fireball in a hiss of steam. As water and flame met, a thick white mist billowed into the air, shrouding the battlefield in a gauzy veil. Seizing the opportunity, Nobunaga darted forward. He slipped through the milky fog just as a fresh volley of fireballs arced around the water barrier's edges. Nathan, who had been controlling those fireballs, twisted their trajectories mid-flight, but there was only so much he could do. They couldn't perform a full 180-degree turn. Caught off balance, Nobunaga was forced to abandon his counterattack. Boom, boom, boom. The fireballs smashed into the ground beyond him, gouging out charred craters with each impact. Though the entire exchange had flashed by in an instant, its power was undeniable. Only after Nathan's assault fizzled out did Shimazu Shinya and the Iwagakure Jonin who just dodged realize they'd been outmaneuvered. The two assailants began spelling out hand seals, preparing to unleash ninjutsu on Nathan, but their movements were agonizingly slow. Sensing they wouldn't complete fire-style Phoenix Fire technique in time, Nathan shifted his focus. Just as they drew their hands into position, he whipped out 6 shuriken and sent them hurtling toward their vital points. Thrown off balance, the pair could only scramble aside, exactly the opening Nathan needed. In one fluid motion, he produced another dozen blades. His hands darted like a dancer scattering petals, flinging shuriken with lethal precision. Panic flashed in their eyes as the steel stars tore through the air. When at last they stumbled to a halt, the urgent shout of Kanhara Nobunaga cut through the tension. "Watch out!" Shimazu Shinya ducked instinctively. A nearly 2-meter-long blade of transparent wind whooshed just above his head, shearing off a few strands of hair that drifted to the ground. Relief washed over him, only to be snatched away by a sudden, piercing scream from his left rear. "Huh?" Shimazu Shinya's heart seized with dread. He whirled around and froze at the sight before him. The shinobi who had just sidestepped Nathan's attack lay collapsed, half of his right arm severed clean off. Worse still, a 10-centimeter gash across his chest spilled blood and organs in a gruesome torrent. The wounded jonin choked out a stifled cry, teetering on the brink of death. Nathan's wind blade had not been aimed at a single target. Drawing on an enormous reserve of chakra, he had condensed the air itself into a razor-sharp edge, intended to fell 2 birds with one stroke. Thanks to a split-second warning from Kanhara Nobunaga, Shimazu Shinya had managed to leap clear of the blade's path. Another Iwagakure Jonin, however, had not been so fortunate. As the tragedy unfolded, Nathan stood at the eye of the storm, breathing heavily. Over the past 10 days, he had poured countless hours and chakra into perfecting this very technique. The result was immediate. His wind style, Wind Blade, had leapt from proficiency level 4 to level 5, rising from 1,660 to 2,000 experience points, now at 870, 5,000 toward the next tier, much like the legendary Rasengan evolution. The battlefield fell silent, save for the wounded man's ragged breaths and the distant clamor of approaching reinforcements. Nathan's eyes, sharp and unblinking, flicked between his allies and the ruined clearing. The cost of progress, he realized, could be devastating and sometimes tragically irreversible. Reaching level 5 is a true turning point. It's the threshold at which even C-rank ninjutsu can be mastered. Nathan still hasn't perfected the wind style, Wind Blade, since its rank remains too high, but the recent upgrade has dramatically quickened its execution. Coupled with its speed and stealth, he now wields it with far greater confidence. Like the Rasengan, once he unleashes it, the result is devastating. Having lost 2 comrades in quick succession, even Kanhara Nobunaga, a real jonin who outclasses the remaining ninja, dares not attack recklessly. The fewer they are, the greater the threat of Nathan's Sharingan illusions becomes. When they were a larger force, an unfortunate target could always be rescued or the genjutsu dispelled by teammates. Now, with only Kanhara and Shimazu Shinya left, a single misstep could give Nathan the opening he needs to annihilate them all. That possibility keeps both of them painfully cautious. Nathan felt surprisingly calm. Facing a 2-pronged attack was an entirely different beast from being surrounded by 4 opponents. A 4-person siege demanded absolute vigilance. Any lapse, and he'd be worn down piece by piece. But with just 2 adversaries, the margin for error widened, and the contest became far more manageable. On top of that, he'd finally unlocked the Mangekyo Sharingan, dramatically amplifying his genjutsu prowess. Even without tapping into its full power, he could handle these 2 challengers without breaking a sweat. Yet Nathan wasn't content to win easily. He saw this skirmish as the perfect opportunity to experiment with his new ocular ability. He resolved to test the subtle enhancements granted by the Mangekyo, employing only low-key illusions so as not to alarm the onlookers. With controlled precision, he would push his limits just enough to gauge how a fully qualified jonin might leverage this heightened genjutsu. In his mind, there was no better way to measure his progress. By doing so, he'd establish a benchmark for NEF, future battles. With that in mind, Nathan lifted his sword and charged at Shimazu Shinya, who stood nearest him. Chapter 258, Control. Nathan barreled straight toward Shimazu Shinya, heart pounding with fierce determination. Shinya's chest tightened, and he spun on his heel, ready to flee. But then he spotted Kanhara Nobunaga sprinting in from the rear, and resolve flickered back to life in his eyes. Clutching his kunai, he squared his shoulders and prepared to face Nathan head-on. Clang! The clash of steel rang sharply through the air as Nathan's short sword whipped in a deadly arc. Free from the usual constraints, he unleashed his signature vision-blocking technique, forcing Shinya to fight in near darkness. Yet Shinya had tangled with Nathan enough times to anticipate most of his moves, parrying just in time to avoid serious injury. Just as Nathan thought he'd carved out an opening, Nobunaga burst onto the scene, hurling himself into the breach. Now flanked by 2 opponents, Nathan snarled, momentarily abandoning his attack to fend off their combined assault. He could feel Nobunaga's desperation like a second heartbeat, strengthening, each strike landing harder, driven by a fierce determination to end the fight quickly. At times, Nobunaga even used Shinya's plight as bait, forcing Nathan to guard against blindside attacks. In that shifting chaos of blades and strategy, control became the only weapon each warrior really wielded, and Nathan was determined not to lose it. Nathan watched their smallest tells as clearly as spotting fireflies in the dark. Every twitch and shift gave him warning that he would never be caught unprepared. He knew well the old adage, the first strike lands hardest, the second is weaker, and by the third, you're running on empty. His opponents craved a death match, but Nathan refused to meet their desire head-on. He simply needed to buy time for the hidden explosives to detonate and give him the opening he sought. As the seconds dragged on, Kanhara Nobunaga grew visibly uneasy. A seasoned shinobi knew better than to let impatience cloud his judgment. Yet watching Nathan block and counter with such economy of motion only heightened his frustration. And when a warrior's focus wavers, mistakes follow. Nathan's plan remained the same: endure, tire them out, then strike. But in the midst of parrying another flurry of blows, he sensed a sudden crack in their defense, too precise to be accidental. Was this their trap or his chance? His mind raced as he activated his Sharingan, the three Magatama spinning in his irises. In an instant, the world slowed. Every muscle twitch, every flicker of color on Nobunaga's brow registered in exquisite detail. He even caught Shimazu Shinya's face tightening with anxiety. In that pregnant moment of hesitation, Nathan saw his opportunity, and it was all he needed. Nathan's mind raced as he assessed the threat. He was certain now that this wasn't a clever trap, but simply a mistiming between Kanhara Nobunaga's downward slash and Shimazu Shinya's kunai throw. With no more hesitation, Nathan dropped low to dodge Nobunaga's blade and in a single fluid motion pivoted to meet Shinya's weapon, using his short sword to deflect the kunai harmlessly aside. Both attacks had failed, and for an instant, neither opponent could recover. That split second was all Nathan needed. Still crouched, he glanced up at Nobunaga, just enough eye contact to tap into his hypnotic gift. Normally, were he to attempt such a trick, Shinya would have had time to regroup and cut off any follow-up blade work. But this time, the two strikes had landed simultaneously. They'd overlapped so precisely that after Nobunaga reeled from Nathan's gaze and impending attack, Shinya had no chance to straighten his arm and launch a second kunai. Seizing the moment, Nathan sprang forward, driving his short sword toward Nobunaga's unguarded side. The blade found its mark before either attacker could close the distance again. It was the perfect demonstration of why a two-man pincer attack demands far more coordination than a full squad siege. With only two participants, the margin for error vanishes, and Nathan had just exploited that, deadly effect. Nathan had always known that with 4 people, any crisis could be diffused. With only 2, however, a single misstep might prove fatal. He didn't hesitate. Under the steady gaze of Kanhara Nobunaga, Nathan summoned every ounce of his will. At first, nothing seemed to happen, but then the 3 tomoe of his Sharingan began to shift. The small comma-shaped marks stretched outward, their inner dots merging into a perfect circle that blossomed across his iris. Each elongated tomoe split in 2, sprouting 6 jet-black spokes that radiated to the edge of his pupil. In an instant, a dark, abstract symbol, a black sun, hung at the center of his eye. Nathan had just opened his Mangekyo Sharingan for the first time, and he'd done so in front of an unsuspecting witness. Nobunaga's eyes widened as he watched those inky lines form. He didn't understand what he was seeing, but every instinct screamed at him to look away. He whipped his head aside, intending to shut his eyes and retreat, but it was too late. The moment had passed in the blink of an eye, yet nothing would ever be the same again. Nathan barely had time to blink before he raised his left hand. With no more than a single, deliberate point of his finger, Kanhara Nobunaga froze in place. His limbs locked stiffly, his consciousness draining away as Nathan's genjutsu wrapped around him like a vice. Beside him, Shimazu Shinya let out a gasp and started to shout, but Nathan needed nothing more than that same silent gesture. One finger whipped out, and Shinya too went rigid as the Sharingan's illusion swept through his mind. In an instant, both Jonin stood motionless, their fierce wills trapped in Nathan's dreamscape. The eerie, black sun that had bloomed in his pupils dissolved, leaving behind only the 3 Magatama of his Mangekyo Sharingan. Nathan stepped back, studying the 2 frozen shinobi with a mix of satisfaction and surprise. He'd always known how formidable a Mangekyo Sharingan-fueled genjutsu could be, but he never imagined he'd subdue 2 seasoned Jonin so effortlessly. As long as he maintained the illusion, neither Nobunaga nor Shinya would break free. And in that quiet certainty, Nathan felt the full weight and promise of his growing power. As expected of the Mangekyo Sharingan, Nathan held his breath as he swung his short sword in a lethal arc. In an instant, the throats of Kanhara Nobunaga and Shimazu Shinya were slit. Agonized by pain and gasping for air, Nobunaga staggered out of the illusion, but Shinya remained trapped in the Mangekyo's nightmare and collapsed, lifeless, before he could even draw his last breath. The true horror of the Sharingan's genjutsu had been laid bare. Ignoring Nobunaga's wide-eyed gaze of shock, Nathan produced a handful of kunai and hurled them with unerring precision. Whoosh, 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 the blades flew more than 10 meters to pin Kawachi Guima and an Iwagakure shinobi, whose fate still hung in the balance, to a nearby rock. Guima, already bleeding and weakened, tried to break free, but Nathan's aim was flawless. Within seconds, he crumpled to the ground, defeated. With a final, shuddering gasp, Nobunaga succumbed to his wounds. 4 bodies lay at Nathan's feet. He paused only long enough to form the familiar hand seal, channels chakra into his lungs, and unleashed 4 roaring blasts of fire style, great fireball technique. The infernos engulfed the corpses, reducing them to ash and smoke in a matter of heartbeats. Nathan hushed the embers drifting on the wind, already moving on to his next target. Without warning, a torrent of flame erupted around the 4 bodies, reducing them to ash in seconds. Nathan didn't take pleasure in desecrating the dead, far from it, but the shinobi world teemed with hidden jutsu that could pry secrets from a corpse. If a member of the Yamanaka clan slipped in and read their memories, his Mangekyou Sharingan might be exposed. Total destruction was the only reliable safeguard. He was aware, however, that erasing flesh wouldn't touch what lingered beyond death, their souls. In theory, a desperate ninja versed in immortal reincarnation or a similar forbidden art could summon these spirits back from the Pure Land, and with them, any knowledge they carried. Practically speaking, though, the odds were infinitesimal. No one had reason to resurrect 4 unknown shinobi. More critically, Nathan possessed no method to bind or dispel a wandering soul, even if he wanted to. With no way to eradicate that remote possibility, he decided to let nature and the flames take their course. Chapter 259, Encirclement and Killing. A soft hiss broke the silence, blisters popping one after another. Nathan studied the 4 charred bodies at his feet, the acrid smell of burnt flesh stinging his nostrils. He waited, brow furrowed, then reluctantly concluded that none of them could be saved. Turning away, he made his way toward the distant clash of steel and chakra. As he approached the main battlefield, the Leaf Shinobi greeted him with cheers, while the Iwa warriors fell back in apprehension. Without a word, Nathan swept his gaze across the fighting lines and spotted a Leaf Jonin locked in combat with an Iwa counterpart. He plunged into the fray. Clang, clash, clang. In moments, Nathan's blade found its mark, cutting through the enemy's defenses. The Leaf standard fluttered overhead as the Iwa Jonin crumpled to the ground. From a nearby command post, Ichiro Kurokawa watched Nathan's quick victory and couldn't help but recall the bitter defeat more than 2 weeks ago. It had been Nathan who turned the tide back then, eliminating critical targets first, rallying the Leaf Jonin to break the Iwa's advance, and ultimately shattering their entire offensive. Now once more, he led the charge toward victory. Will this really happen again? Kurokawa Ichiro's gaze flicked from the 4 burning corpses in the distance to the fallen Iwagakure Jonin at Nathan's feet. His left hand and forearm ached with stiff chakra residue, an ache that stoked a sudden flare of anger. Scanning the battlefield, he saw that half of the Konoha shinobi lay dead or dying. Victory was within his grasp. Without another moment's hesitation, Ichiro signaled his troops. In seconds, 30 rock ninjas fanned out and closed in, forming a tight cordon around Nathan. But Nathan didn't flinch. He stood perfectly still, as if the ring of adversaries didn't even exist. His calm was not bravado, it was certainty. These opponents simply posed no real threat to him. In truth, he had noticed their maneuvering long ago and chose to let them approach, waiting for the precise moment to strike. As the battle erupted, Nathan seized his moment. He thrust his hands forward and unleashed wind release. Great breakthrough, a roaring gale that shredded the enemy's ranks and rent open Iwagakure's formation. For a heartbeat, his Konoha shinobi surged ahead, only to find that sheer hard power still lay with the Iwa forces. They rallied almost immediately, driving back Nathan's men. Worse yet, while Nathan was locked in combat with Kambaru Nobunaga and her allies, reports streamed in of 50 or 60 Konoha ninja cut down on the field. If he pressed on the same way, slaying every Iwakure Jonin yet losing his own troops by the dozens, victory would be Pyrrhic. His true mission wasn't to seize this stronghold at any cost, but to bring his comrades home alive. He needed a new plan, one that didn't hinge solely on challenging the enemy's elite. But he faced a hard limit. The unspoken rules of engagement forbade targeting Iwagakure's genin. Crossing that line would only invite wholesale reprisals from every young ninja they'd spared, driving Konoha's losses even higher. Nathan sheathed his blade and scanned the field, determined to find a way to break the enemy's resolve without sacrificing the last of his own forces. Nathan had expected a dead end, no escape. Yet Kurokawa Ichiro had gone on the offensive, summoning Iwagakure's mid- and lower-level shinobi to swarm him. No wonder they fought so ruthlessly. 30 ninjas in all, only 2 of them jonin, the rest were nothing more than chunin and genin. Nathan let a quiet confidence settle over him. He'd faced far greater odds, hundreds of opponents at once, and walked away unscathed. 30 was barely a challenge. Kill him! Kurokawa's order cracked across the battlefield. In an instant, kunai flew, shuriken whistled, and bursts of elemental ninjutsu fractured the air. A less experienced shinobi would have fallen back on pure defense. Nathan chose to attack. He drove his heel into the ground and rocketed into the sky. Mid-air, arched his back, letting a volley of shurikens skim harmlessly past. Below, kunai clattered against the dirt where he'd been standing. In the same motion, Nathan formed a quick sequence of hand seals. A cone of crackling blue chakra flared to life in his palm, his opening strike in what promised to be a very short battle. Nathan's hands flew through the seals in a blur. He drew in a deep, steady breath, and then unleashed it all in a single, forceful exhalation. Wind release, great breakthrough, he roared. Over 2,000 chakra points surged through him and erupted into a blizzard-like vortex. In an instant, the spinning gust coalesced into a towering tornado that crashed into the earth, ripping up thick layers of mud and gravel. The whirlwind radiated outward, sweeping up every kunai, shuriken, and exploding tag the rock ninjas had launched, and flinging them right back at their owners. Mid-air, some of the detonating talismans ignited, their flare-ups feeding the tornado and making it even more ferocious. For a heartbeat, the battlefield fell silent. Then the Iwa shinobi staggered back in unison, eyes wide with disbelief and panic. No one moved to advance. No one dared. They simply gawked at Nathan and the storm he had summoned. Could a single human really wield such devastating wind-style ninjutsu? They each boasted over 2,000 chakra points, yet here was Nathan, drawing on an equal or even greater reserve and unleashing it in a single breath. Is this even possible? One of the younger ninja whispered, voice trembling. Nathan stood at the storm's eye, his chest heaving. Around him, the tornado's howling winds slowly died away, but its impact was unmistakable. The ground lay shredded, and every attack the rock ninjas had thrown was now scattered in ruin at their feet. In that stunned silence, Nathan bore witness to the raw power he had just wielded, and to the fact that nothing would ever be the same. Releasing that much chakra at once and molding it into ninjutsu isn't something you can do on a whim. It demands not only exceptional chakra control, but also an intimate knowledge of the technique itself. If Nathan's chakra control hadn't already reached level 5, and if he hadn't fully mastered wind release, great breakthrough, he wouldn't even have been able to attempt it. The power of a single massive chakra release stunned even him. The cleansing force was simply unparalleled. Nathan couldn't help but recall the day he first learned wind release. Great breakthrough. Back then, he'd searched in vain for the large-scale attack technique, fire style, great fire extinguishment, and had settled on a makeshift alternative. Now, at last, that improvised method was proving its worth, and Nathan felt a surge of satisfaction. As he plummeted through the air, Nathan's eyes snapped open. He spotted the stone ghost ninjas swarming below. With a swift motion, he rifled through his pouch and pulled out several shuriken. In one fluid gesture, he launched them. The blades whistled through the wind, covering more than 20 meters, and struck true, each one embedding itself in a mid-rank stone ghost ninja before they even knew what hit them. Nathan barely registered the screams before hitting the ground. He landed solidly on his feet and kicked off in a sideward vault. In the same instant, a volley of kunai streaked past, each one bearing a burning detonator tag. He leapt back as 3 successive blasts rocked the clearing. Dust and smoke curled through the trees, but beneath the murk, Nathan moved like water. He weaved around spinning shuriken and diving kunai, closing the distance to the nearest Iwagakure shinobi, one of the armored rock ninjas. His blade flashed in the half-light. With a single, fluid motion, Nathan drew the short sword at his hip and slashed. The steel whispered through flesh and blood spurted. The ninja's throat was severed in an instant. Before the body could slump, Nathan pressed a new detonating talisman against the fallen man's chest and somersaulted away. Boom! The explosion threw earth into the air. Through the settling debris came a startled cry. Nathan risked a glance. Beside the throat-slain shinobi lay another warrior, his gear blackened and smoking. He didn't move. He was already dead. Nathan tucked his sword away, eyes narrowing as he prepared for whatever came next. Nathan withdrew his gaze and, slipping once more into his ghostly form, glided through the ranks of Iwagakure shinobi. His 3 Magatama Sharingan flared to life, guiding every strike with lethal precision. One by one, enemy ninjas fell or screamed in pain as Nathan cut them down faster than they could react. Kurokawa Ichiro and another jonin lunged forward to halt him, but they never stood a chance. In mere moments, most of the 30 Iwagakure warriors lay dead or grievously wounded. Chapter 260, Adjustment. Fire Style, Phoenix Fire Technique. Nathan slipped between the lines of Iwagakure's jutsu, a blur of motion as shuriken and chakra blades whizzed past. In one fluid movement, he lunged forward, drove his blade through the heart of a surprised genin, and used the fallen body as an improvised shield. Before anyone could react, he twisted, raised his left hand, and sealed the ninjutsu in the space of a heartbeat. Instantly, hundreds of fist-sized fireballs blossomed around him, each one crackling with crimson energy. Nathan guided them like a meteor shower, raining down relentless heat on the Iwagakure shinobi arrayed before him. They unleashed earth and stone jutsu to defend themselves, scattering dust and debris, but in the end, every single one of those fireballs was dodged or deflected. Just as the enemy prepared to counterstrike, a nearly invisible wind blade sliced through the chaos. A sickening rip of flesh and steel echoed across the battlefield, and 2 chunin from Iwagakure were cleaved in half. They didn't die instantly. Their upper torsos slumped to the ground as agonized screams tore from their throats. On the flanks, the remaining ninjas froze, eyes widening in horror. Some stared at the living corpses at their feet, others swallowed hard, heartbeats thunderous in their ears. In that split second, fear gripped them tighter than any chain, and Nathan stood at the center of it all, calm and unyielding, ready for whatever came next. They all stood motionless, eyes fixed on the spot where Nathan had stood, as if waiting for him to reappear and strike again. But the boy was already gone. Across the clearing, Captain Kurokawa Ichiro watched in growing frustration. Nathan remained unnervingly calm, fending off the rock ninja's assault almost effortlessly. Kurokawa ground his teeth. Damn it, he whirled on the officer beside him. Deploy the 3rd and 4th squads right now! The officer blinked in surprise. Sir? Kurokawa's glare was icy. I said, do it immediately. The officer glanced toward Nathan, whose ease under fire only underscored how outmatched these mid-ranked ninjas were. He opened his mouth to protest, but Kurokawa's authority left no room for argument. Yes, Captain, he muttered, turning on his heel to carry out the order, even as his gut told him he was sending men straight into the wolf's den. Doesn't Ichiro Kurokawa understand this? Of course he does. He simply has no other choice. By launching the siege first, they've already violated the battlefield's unspoken rules. Now the only way to keep Nathan from aiding Konoha's mid- and lower-rank shinobi is to send a handful of jonin to pin him down. Ichiro cast his gaze over the entire field. Every available Iwagakure jonin was already entangled with Konoha's high-level fighters. There wasn't a single spare pair of hands. Yet if they didn't pour more strength into containing Nathan, he would break free and turn the tide elsewhere. Committing additional forces might cost them dearly, but at least it would lock Nathan in place. As long as they secured victories on the other fronts, Nathan's effort here would count for nothing, and this stronghold would inevitably fall under Iwagakure's banner. As for the fates of those mid- and low-rank shinobi caught in the crossfire, in the politics of Iwagakure, Ichiro Kurokawa could scarcely bring himself to care. They'd been willing to sacrifice dozens of their comrades if it meant finally wearing Nathan down, if even such a terrible cost could end his rampage. In theory, it was a sound plan. In practice, nobody had reckoned on just how far beyond their expectations his strength lay. More than 10 minutes into the engagement, Captain Kurokawa Ichiro surveyed the carnage. The third and fourth squads lay broken, most of their shinobi either dead or grievously wounded, and only a handful still clung to consciousness. In that short span, Nathan had cut down over 40 Stone Village ninjas. His slaughtering speed outstripped anything the Leaf's finest had ever demonstrated. At this rate, if the Hidden Leaf didn't collapse first, it would be the Stone Village that was ground to dust. Captain, the Iwagakure Chunin at Ichiro's side gasped, voice tight with desperation. We can't hold him off any longer. You have to come up with something. Fast. Ichiro's jaw clenched. He had no answer. A few days ago, Nathan's power had been awe-inspiring, yet still within the realm of what Shinobi could contain. Today he was fighting something inhuman. And they were running out of time. Nathan's power had skyrocketed into the realm of the unbelievable. Not only had he slain the 4 Hara clan operatives assigned to eliminate him, but he now had the remaining foes pinned under his weight. There was nowhere left to plead for mercy or reason. Damn, are we forced to pull back? Kurokawa Ichiro studied the battlefield. Their forces still held strong positions. A full retreat made no sense. After a brief pause, he turned to an Iwagakure Chunin standing nearby. Withdraw teams 1, 2, 5, and 6, he ordered crisply. Deploy them to intercept the incoming Konoha Jonin and block any reinforcements. Then have Kurofang's squad move in to subdue Uchiha Nathan. The Chunin's eyes brightened in understanding. Ichiro's plan was straightforward. Free up the blocking units, isolate the new arrivals, and then bring them all down on Nathan in a coordinated strike. They would suffer casualties, no doubt, but they'd avoid the staggering losses they'd just endured. Ichiro Kurokawa stared at the field where Nathan still cut a swath through their forces. This gamble placed the entire burden squarely on their shoulders. If they couldn't crush or kill him now, Konoha's veteran shinobi might swoop in and turn the tide. It was a desperate risk, but there was no turning back. Any further delay, any attempt to swarm Nathan with more troops, and they would be the ones to buckle under pressure. As the Chunin from Iwagakure slipped away to relay Kurokawa's orders, Ichiro's eyes never left Nathan's fluid, lethal movements. He'd heard tales of single warriors who shifted the course of wars by sheer force of will, but those legends belonged to the greats of the shinobi world. Now, here was Nathan, so young, yet moving with the same uncanny certainty. Ichiro could almost glimpse the shadows of those storied heroes in the boy's blade, as if the next name carved into history would be Ghost Sword Nathan. The thought struck him like a blow, and his face went pale. Could it be that, deep down, he believed even Haifeng's reinforcements combined wouldn't be enough to stop Uchiha Nathan? He held the question in his mind, yet no answer came. He already knew the answer in his heart. He just didn't want to admit it. If that's so, then I'll see it with my own eyes. Kurokawa Ichiro snorted, tracing the seams of his cold, rigid left forearm. More than 2 weeks ago, he had led an assault on the Xiaogu village stronghold, only to be cut down by Nathan, who single-handedly slew several of his senior ninja and shattered their formation. In that same skirmish, beset by Konoha's elite, Ichiro's arm was severed, an injury he blamed squarely on Nathan. Now, driven by both personal revenge and the village's interests, he was resolved to settle the score once and for all.